sir. How are you?
Good. Matt, how you doing?
Good.
Pink, red,
Excuse me?
It's also International Women's Day. I just want to go someplace international.
We did pretty well last month.
He was just here earlier today.
How are you today?
I'm good, and yourself?
Hanging in there.
Good.
I like it.
There you go.
Yeah, give me a call. Yowza.
How are you, sir?
Popular tonight.
It is popular. 5 apart.
Let me know when you're ready. We'll get her going.
Huh?
We're okay. We're okay. We're fine.
Yeah, I didn't even. Yeah, I got
Are they what?
No harm.
Five.
I got a friend of a potential conflict.
Five.
Of course.
This is my way too long. I mean, you guys gonna have to decide, I think.
All right.
But I'll bring it up.
Sure.
But I can't. Yeah, I gotta disclose that. Yeah, I forget the last.
This is an exhibits list that I did up that can help
Sorry about that, Dave. I got.
a little bit better. And not to mention,
I saw that. going to be fine.
Does this include this?
It does not.
Okay.
This,
Okay.
when I emailed everyone and said there's an updated packet.
I read that.
The packet has that in it.
I read that,
But
yeah.
this is separate from in here.
Okay, cool, thank you.
It may feel different by the end. Yeah, Leslie's gonna go over the rules. All right, board, everybody ready? Paul, good? Ready? Okay.
Are the microphones on?
Are they? It's on.
It is? Oh, it's probably.
Claire? 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 You good? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's about 6:35, and it's time to call a regular meeting of the East Bay Charter Township Zoning Board of Appeals to order. May we have roll call, please?
Wolf,
Yes.
Stasinski,
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Cook,
Here.
Hausman.
Here. We'll move on to the agenda. First, we'll review for conflict of interest. Does anybody on the board have a potential or actual conflict with any of tonight's agenda items?
I might have a potential one. I'm not quite sure, but this memo we just got from Parker Harvey, that's my wife's boss who wrote this. So I don't know. It's up to the board, I guess, is my understanding. So if I
Okay.
do, if you think I do, that's understandable. If not, that's fine too.
Do you
But he is
feel,
my, this, yeah.
do you feel you can objectively hear and make a decision potentially?
I would hope so. I mean, that's, I wouldn't see a problem with that, but, appearances of, it's up to you guys, so
Okay,
that's what, my understanding.
Chairman, just keep in mind that the Parker Harvey in the memo, he's representing members of the public, he's not representing the group of the applicants on either side here.
okay,
There's no direct conflict of interest there.
okay, thank you. You're good with that?
Yep.
All right. Does anybody else have a potential or actual conflict of interest tonight? Hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
All.
Motion carried. Next, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from our February 8th, 2022 regular meeting.
Oh, yeah. I move to approve the minutes of the East Bay Charter Township Zoning Board of Appeals, February 8th, 2022.
Support.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Approved. And at this time, we welcome public comment for any issues that are not on tonight's agenda. All right, hearing none. Unfinished business?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Could we, for the purposes of this meeting tonight and also the public, review what the rules are with respect to public comment?
We certainly will, sir.
Thank you.
Yes. Unfinished business, I don't believe we have any. All right. And next on to new business, which is going to be a concurrent presentation of Appeal Request 8-21 by Lakemore Landings and Appeal 9-21 by Protect Forest Lakes. At this time, I'll ask if Claire will please give us a good overview and set us up for tonight's discussion and potential action.
Good evening, and I think I'm going over what I started to go over back in November, so this is kind of the same overview, but just wanted to provide a quick history since this has been more in the Planning Commission's arena and is now coming before the ZBA. So Lakemore Resort has been in front of the Planning Commission for site plan review. It's, as you're, I think, all aware, it's located on Arbutus Lake. It's considered a cabin court, and it's operated since at least the 1960s. So there was an amended site plan that was reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission in June of 2021. The site plan decision of the Planning Commission is not being appealed tonight. However, there was an administrative decision related to continuation of the boats that is being appealed tonight. So tonight, both applicants are seeking to appeal the decision of the zoning administrator, who determined in a letter that was dated July 19th of 2021, which is in your packet, that the Lakemore Resort can continue to operate 630 square feet of boats. This would be approximately 3 average-size pontoon boats as lawful nonconforming use based on evidence obtained by the township. So the evidence that we have and is also included in your packet as part of the exhibits is an affidavit from Tricia Adams stating that 9 fishing boats were acquired when the property was purchased from Max Landing. We looked at aerial photography. We measured the size of the fishing boats, determined the total area that they took up, and thus limiting future use to the same overall area. Worked with legal counsel to take that approach as opposed to limiting based on size of motors, type of boats, those types of things. We also reviewed past zoning ordinances to better understand what the rules were in relation to use of boats back when Max Landing was first came into existence and throughout its years. So we reviewed the 1961 zoning ordinance to confirm that boats at Max Landing in the 1960s were not regulated under the zoning ordinance at that time, making them a legal non-conforming use. So you've got 2 different appeals this evening. The first one is Appeal 8-21. So that's on behalf of Lakemore Landings. They're appealing the number of permitted non-conforming boats which can be used. Specifically, they're appealing the use of the square footage to determine the number of boats that are permitted. And they're also appealing that the township's definition of boat should not apply to non-motorized. So that would include kayaks, canoes, stand-up paddle boards. Appeal number 9-21 is on behalf of Protect Forest Lakes. They're appealing the same administrative decision by the zoning administrator. They stated that the township has violated its zoning ordinance, master plan, and the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act by permitting expansions of nonconformities, and specifically that Lakemore has voluntarily relinquished the lawful nonconforming use of boats and docks. They're also looking for the township to limit the use of shore structures, which would be docks, to what was previously used at Max Landing. They approximate about 320 square feet as opposed to what is currently being used on the property. So included in your packet is a list of exhibits, and our legal counsel is going to go into more detail after we hear presentations by both applicants. But included in the exhibits, you've got the applications from both applicants, correspondence from both attorneys, and we've got a few different correspondence on multiple dates. We also have correspondence from members of the public. We have the historic excerpts from the zoning ordinance as relevant and applied to this issue. We have the affidavit from Tricia Adams, correspondence from the township attorney, and then we also have the draft findings of fact from our legal counsel. That's the very last item in your packet. And those have been updated since they were first reviewed in November based on additional evidence and submitted by both applicants. So as I mentioned, legal counsel will go into more detail on this after the public hearings. Is there any questions before we start from the board just on the history and context of what you're reviewing tonight?
Thank you very much. Mr. Wendling?
I just want to supplement a little bit here. Ms. McGregor, attorney for Protect Forest Lakes, filed an additional letter for our conversation after the last meeting, which in November, which didn't happen because of the lack of having all board members present. And she outlined more specifically, and she had, I believe, in her previous letter, what PFL's appeals are. Number one, Lakemore abandoned the use of all but 4 Max Landings fishing boats. Number 2, the zoning administrator has allowed Lakemore to unlawfully extend the non-conforming use of multiple boats. And 3, the zoning administrator has allowed Lakemore to unlawfully extend the non-conforming shore structures. And on the shore structures, which includes the dock, there's also the August 31st letter from the zoning administrator, because after looking at the ordinance, there's no language in there that limits the wharfing out and the square footage of the dock, regardless of the situation. The Lakes Area District only limits boat access sites for multiple boats as defined in the zoning ordinance shall not be permitted where you have access by, through the public, through a private piece of property, which is the case with Lakemore. But, the issue is the boats themselves. They're unlawful if they're accessing it by using the shore structures such as docks, but it's not related to the square footage of the docks. That's a different animal, and I don't see any regulation in the zoning ordinance, although council may argue otherwise. But that's a clarification to make sure that the board understands what the appeal is, and I'll be quiet and let the attorneys for each side speak at this point.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we'll hear from counsel, from each of the appellants. Please step up to the lectern and let us know who you are. Tell us what you'd like us to know.
Good evening. My name is Mark McKellar. I represent Lakemore Resort, and I want to thank you guys for coming out this evening to review this matter, which are not always fun. But I want to just make a couple clarifications on exactly why we appealed. We were initially provided the square footage calculation based on 9 boats. It became evident to us that we likely had historical use of 12 boats, and it was recommended, rather than administratively change it, by the township to request a variance under the theory of adding more than 9 boats, but adding 12 and recalculating the square footage based on that. Okay, so the idea being, take 630 square feet, divide it by the 9 boats, that gives you how many square feet? I think it was 70 square feet. We would add 70 square feet for another 4 or another 3 boats. That was the idea, at the very minimum. While we were appealing that decision to the ZBA, it made sense to me to expand on the issue of the number of boats being the actual appropriate way to define the nonconformity rather than the square footage. And so you'll see our appeal is really, one, the number of boats that pre-existed should be the reason or the determination of how many boats are there, rather than square footage. In the alternative, we knew we likely had more boats, and so we need to, again, in the alternative, seek a greater square footage based on the nonconformity. So that's really what we were here for. So I'm going to expand on those issues. You guys have probably read every communication from us, and in the alternative, I don't want to belabor the abandonment. I think that the case law is abundantly clear. The burden of proof is actually on the township to prove the abandonment. We have not exceeded the 1 year. The last occupancy of the Max Landing with boat rental was July 30th, 2019. The first rental of Lakemore with boats was July 17th, 2020, so it was a couple weeks shy of a year. And certainly intent can be derived from my clients who had absolutely no intent of getting rid of the use. So I rely on my reports on that, and I'm happy to rebuttal if needed later, but I think that that's pretty clear that abandonment is really a non-issue at this point. So I'm going to go right to the, the boats. So The argument that the boats are permitted comes down to the nonconformity. The nonconformity exists as a result of a 2001 zoning change that made multi-boat access sites not permitted, or this type of use not permitted in the township. Prior to that, they were permitted in the lakes area under the 1961 zoning ordinance. And the greatest issue is identifying the scope of use. And you really do need to take a snapshot, and Mr. Parker points out in his letter that is the appropriate law, that during the time in which it becomes nonconforming, you decide what is the scope and use of that property. You guys were provided a supplemental affidavit that we just acquired literally yesterday. We're unaware of this person's, information until Saturday, and when we contacted him, he was able to provide it. And it's from a guy named Robert Peterson. And Mr. Peterson was the caretaker for Lakemore from 1996 to 2016. Mr. Peterson opines in his affidavit that in 2001 there were 12 boats. And what that was there was 14 cabins on the property, 2 of which were mostly long-term rentals. The remaining ones were the summer cottages, and those 12 cottages always had a boat historically. And in 2001, in fact, they had the boats. He maintained the boats. Those boats included motors, which could be rented for an additional charge. And he also opined and provided that there were 4 kayaks available as an amenity to the cabins. And there were also 3 canoes. He doesn't opine on that, but there were 3 canoes that we acquired, and we have that information in our additional affidavits from Tricia. So what that does is provide us the actual 2001 scope of use. We initially thought there might have been up to 14, but in fact there were 12. So now we have 12 boats, 14-foot boats, approximately 5 to 5 feet 1 inches wide. Those boats would then have would have to be included in the determination of the scope, plus the kayaks and the canoes. So in reviewing that through the ordinance, and I understand the square footage argument, but the township's definition of boats basically says any watercraft. It doesn't define the type of watercraft. It's any type of watercraft capable of being utilized on the lakes. And therefore, it is my belief that definition is broad, that the use, in fact, is the nonconformity, not the instrumentality of the use. So there's case law, and I provide the case where, for example, a gentleman had a nonconforming truck, which previously was 27,000 pounds in capacity. He had 3 axles and could weigh about 20,000 pounds. That was the truck that he had when the nonconformity existed and became in existence, like ours in 2001. But he subsequently bought a truck that had the capacity of 57,000 pounds, I believe, 4 axles and additional weight in the actual truck itself. And the court said, listen, the use is really the intent, the vehicle, the technology, the additional axles. He was using the truck for the same purposes. That use doesn't change, even though the ordinance says you can't have a truck that weighs more than 10,000 pounds in a driveway that's residential. And that case is the kind of preeminent case that describes the scope expansion concern, that it's not the instrumentality, it's actually the use. So it's not the boat, it's the use. The use was boats. Certainly technology has changed. They don't use wooden boats. They use aluminum boats. Aluminum boats with 2 strokes now are aluminum boats with 4 strokes. The fact is that, culture's changed, likes have changed. What used to be 4 winds on every dock is now a pontoon on every dock. And the boat itself, can be argued to have, impacts greater or impacts less. It doesn't have 2-stroke noise. It has 4-stroke noise, which is less. It's safer to handle and maneuver with kids in the boat. You can talk about wakes and things like that, but the reality is the use, not the instrumentality. And that broad definition of boat means boat. So we believe that there's a strong argument for the fact that if we had 12 boats, we're entitled to 12 boats within reason. We believe that 22-foot pontoons that are consistent with other pontoons by size and horsepower in the lake is not inconsistent whatsoever. If we had 47-foot Fountain Lightnings with twin motors and Captain's Choice exhaust, that might be something different, but we're not in that exceeding area. In addition, the boats are used in the same manner. They're used by guests. They're used by guests for their family. There's an allegation that they were fishing boats originally and that now these ones don't permit fishing. The term fishing boat is the type of boat, not necessarily the activity on the fishing boat. And the pontoons, they don't have fishing activities on them just because of the cleanliness and issues with that. They do permit those on the 4 remaining V-bottom aluminum boats that are on the lake for Lake Moore. This is akin to, you're not going to have an activity on a boat. You're not going to have bass boats and say you can only bass fish on them. That's just the type of boat it is. So with that said, I think there's an absolutely strong case the law supports, in fact, actually the broader interpretation, which is a boat is a boat. That's the use that was used. This boat is not substantially different in its expansion of the type of use, and therefore they should be permitted the same number of boats they had before. The reality is we don't necessarily need 12 boats, but at the very minimum, we'd like to, under this interpretation, have a boat for each unit there, which is 8, and then be able to have a couple of the rowboats. I'll get into the kayaks and the canoes and paddle boards right now. This is kind of a third tangent, a third issue we had, and that is kayaks, paddle boards, and canoes, arguably under the ordinance, because it is so broad, and the definition of boats could be utilized to define and determine a boat. It seems incongruent with the actual practice and enforcement of the township. I was unable to find any history of enforcement where they include kayaks and canoes or paddle boards in determining how many boats you're permitted or boat usage or boat dockage. Those things are just not necessarily the same type of activity. I can understand a rowboat, aluminum rowboat, and essentially anything above and beyond that, but we would ask that the township consistently following the idea that those things are not regulated, like boats in the township, that the ZBA also confirm that activity by defining the scope of boats to be determinative of multi-boat access sites or the number of boats someone may have, to not include activities such as kayaks, canoes, and paddle boards. And that goes for both arguments related to the square footage as well. And the alternative, if they don't, then they have to include those as part of the square footage, because those canoes and kayaks were part of the non-conforming permitted use in 2001. So I'll go to square footage. This one's a little easier. We had 9 boats that we purchased, and that was the basis upon which the township relied, which makes sense, because at the time we didn't have anything then to hunch that 12 boats were being utilized previously. We were able to acquire the affidavit that indicates, in fact, there were 12 boats. So that actually establishes in 2011 the 12 aluminum boats, the 4 kayaks that were there at the time that it became non-conforming. So the appropriate calculation under square footage for these purposes would be to take the 12 and the kayaks and make a determination that in 2001, the square footage that was scoped is appropriately those numbers, which would increase our square footage. Not a whole lot, but would increase it by 3 aluminum boats and the 4 kayaks. So either way, the use was not abandoned. There's no evidence of abandonment, and the township has not opined or provided evidence of that, which would be necessary, and frankly, it's contradictory to not only the intent, but the law. And I think actually the township's ordinance provides that boats should be permitted by the number, not necessarily by the square feet. Again, any alternative, we would not prefer it, but we are willing to accept, if we must, the determination that square footage is the appropriate calculation, but that square footage needs to increase based on the newly found information. And that's why we were before you today. Was initially, we believed we had 12 boats in the kayaks and canoes. We needed to change that number. And that's really what we appealed. So with that, again, I don't want to belabor the issues that we raised in defense of PFL's arguments. I think those are clear in the record. But I believe that we strongly sit in a position to fall at least by the square footage, but very likely by number of boats. I'd also agree and concur with Mr. Wendling and the August letter from Preston Taylor that docks are not regulated in the ordinance, and they are identified in those ordinance sections, but they are not regulated in any fashion applicable to us. So with that, I think I would probably leave it up to questions. If there's concerns or questions you guys have specific to this project, specific to our request, I'm happy to answer those.
Any questions at this time, Board, or would we like to recall council at a later time after we hear the rest of the presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay, fair
thank
enough.
you.
Thank you.
All right, and now if we could hear from the representative of Protect Forest Lakes.
Hello. How are you? I have a PowerPoint presentation, but we had a little technical difficulty tonight. So what Preston kindly did is printed it. And if I could ask you, could I pass this out to them?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Gail McGregor. I'm with the firm of Williams, Ratner, and Plunkett from Birmingham, Michigan, so I had a little bit of a drive to get up here today. Fortunately, it was nice weather, and I just want to say thank you for hearing us tonight. We appreciate your time. Protect Forest Lakes, this is on the first page after the title page, is a nonprofit organization that's made up of a group of concerned homeowners, predominantly with homes on Arbutus Lake. And this group has filed an appeal, as has been introduced, regarding the non-conforming boats and docks that have been installed at Lakemore Resorts. The zoning administrator's decision, which has been appealed, permits an unlawful expansion of the nonconformities, and which is contrary to the master plan of East Bay Township for this district, as well as the Zoning Enabling Act, which basically provides that when there is a nonconformity which can be continued, the township must abide by the ordinance and the ordinance's limitations on the nonconformities. And with respect to your ordinance, which we'll see in a minute, it does not allow an expansion. If there is an expansion, of variance is required. So that is what the Zoning Enabling Act requires, that you follow that section of your ordinance. If you go to page 4, this is a picture of Max Landing. Now, Max Landing, as you know, was the prior owner of this property, and this is an aerial photograph of the shoreline when it was Max Landing. You can see that the docks that were previously installed by Max Landing were shorter than the 14-foot fishing boats. And the shoreline is relatively, just dotted with these small fishing boats and docks. The next page, the southern portion of the Lakemore property was not part of Max Landing. This was not a cabin court at the time of the change of ordinance, and it did not have multi-user boat access or storage on this lot prior to the lot combination with Max Landing, the Max Landing parcel. Its zoning designation at the time and now remains in the LA district, which is low-density residential. We call this parcel Parcel Y. Again, it possessed no multi-user boat access or storage under prior ownership. It was not owned by Max Landing. It was owned by a different owner. It possessed no commercial rental operations of any sort under prior ownership. And the non-conforming uses on Parcel Y are not grandfathered. And I suggest that you see the case of Patrick versus Lansing 361 Mish 489. So therefore, the multi-user boat access and storage on parcel Y is a violation of the Lakes Area District. The next page, page 6, shows a drawing. This came from the construction drawings, I believe, of Lake Moore's. And it shows the lot line. Max Landing parcel is in the north, and parcel Y is to the south. So the next page, page 7, shows a current picture of the shoreline that was taken in 2021. It's the current shoreline created by Lake Moore Resort. On the left of the photograph, you can see a dock system that has 3 canopies plus docks. And in the middle is another dock system, and on the far right, there is yet another dock system and canopy. On page 8, you can see another photograph. This is a wider photograph, and it shows that Lake Moore has actually added a multi-use boat storage to parcel Y, which is the yellow on the left. This is an unlawful nonconformity. Page 9, if you go to the next page, this shows, again, another photograph of how Lake Moore has substituted Max Landing's aluminum fishing boats with at least 3 high-powered tri-tune boats, kayaks, paddleboards, and 4 of Max Landing fishing boats. And I just want to say here for a minute in response to something that Brother Counsel said about the use. And that is that if we're looking just at the use, it's clear that the use, Max Landing's use of boats were fishing boats. They had very small motors. If they were rented at all, they didn't have to be used with a motor. But the power on those motors was 9.9 horsepower max. You couldn't tube behind those boats. You couldn't water ski behind those boats. The use is different between a tri-tune and a aluminum fishing boat. So if we're going to say boats are boats and we're looking at the use, then let's be honest about how they're being used. And they are being used differently than how they were being used at Max Landing. So violation of the ordinance. Okay, Lake Moore's nonconforming shore structures as it relates to the boat storage and boat access sites is in clear violation of Section 201 of the ordinance, which states, any lawful use of land or structures existing at the effective date of the ordinance may be continued, even though such use does not conform to the provisions of the ordinance, but no such use shall be enlarged or extended. This is the section of the ordinance that I mentioned earlier that you all, this body, has to abide by in making a decision. Your ordinance clearly says that any lawful nonconforming use may be, with the approval of the zoning board, be changed only to a less objectionable and more restrictive nonconforming use. It cannot be expanded. And then I also want to mention what I perceive as a logical fallacy that's been presented to you about the argument that the ordinance definitions of boat and dock do not contain any dimensional limits, and therefore there can be no quote-unquote expansion of the nonconformity because there are no limits in your ordinance on size and dimensions. However, the ordinance gives the township the authority to regulate boats and docks, and you all, with the photographic evidence and other evidence that's being presented, can see the difference in what was Max Landing and what is Lake Moore and what Lake Moore is asking for, what they have and what they're asking for. Your ordinance section 405-2L2 provides regulation of shore structures, which include permanent and temporary docks in the LA district. And this is, for a temporary dock, it's the seasonal placement of reasonably sized dock, which is consistent with adjoining docks. That's language from your ordinance. So contrary to what's been stated, your ordinance does provide for some regulation of docks and shore structures. If you go to page 11, the next page, Lake Moore has significantly expanded both the use and the structures. So here you can see a comparison between Max Landing, which had 12 to 14 aluminum 14-foot fishing boats with a 5.5 or a 9.9 horse motor, optional, and 8 dock systems of 10 by 4 feet, pieces totaling about 320 square feet. Lake Moore Resort now has 4 aluminum fishing boats with the same 5.5 or 9.9 horsepower motors, which are mandatory. You have to rent them with the motor, is my understanding. At least 3 21-foot Tritoons with 140 to 200 horsepower motors, mandatory. Approximately 40 kayaks and paddle boards, and 5 dock systems with water patios totaling approximately 1,500 square feet, and also 4 canopies. They have substituted the Max Landing fishing boats with these larger Tritoons that do allow for other uses than fishing. And in fact, this photograph on page 12 with the little language that's inserted here onto the photograph is from the marketing materials of Lake Moore, and it does prohibit fishing on their Tritoon boats. My understanding is that this has to do with, as opposing counsel stated, with not wanting the boats to be used in a manner that might be messy or whatnot. However, the pontoons themselves are really being used for other leisure activity, pleasure activity on the water than what the fishing boats were being used for. So the use of the pontoons is different. The next page, page 13. Michigan law does not allow for expansion of a nonconforming use. So in addition to your ordinance, there's plenty of case law in Michigan that have held that is Michigan's public policy to restrict rather than increase and to eventually eliminate nonconforming uses, to facilitate the development that is consistent with the applicable zoning ordinance over time. So there's a couple cases that I cite there, Cole versus City of Battle Creek, which is 298 Mich 98, and Rasmussen versus Penfield Township, which is 104 Mich App 361. There also is a general rule in Michigan that a nonconforming use must not only begin before zoning restriction becomes effective, but also must be lawfully established and operated in order for it to qualify for the nonconformity. Next page. Neither the zoning administrator nor the zoning board of appeals have the authority to expand a nonconforming use. The zoning administrator, under your ordinance section 8022C, under no circumstances is permitted to make changes to the ordinance or vary the terms of the ordinance in carrying out his or her duties as the zoning administrator. And this body, the ZBA, shall hear and decide appeals where it is alleged that by the appellant that there is an error in any order or requirement. These are your duties, and you can't really act beyond these duties. This is, I'm sure you all are all aware, this is not a constitutional body. You take your authority from the Zoning Enabling Act, and that's, your ordinance is your guide. So, abandonment of the nonconforming use is something that it seems like folks don't think is relevant. Well, Protect Forest Lakes does think it's relevant. The nonconformities that exist now at Lake Moore are especially indefensible when you consider that Max Landing abandoned its nonconforming uses prior to the sale of the property. Ordinance Section 201 states that if a nonconforming use of any land or structure is discontinued for a continuous period of 365 days, no further nonconforming use shall be allowed. And then, of course, you have the issue of what does that mean, discontinuance, that it's the same thing as abandonment. And in order to establish it, you have to have an act of discontinuing a use in whole or in part, and a clear intent or omission on the part of the owner, which clearly shows a voluntary decision to abandon. So we dug, since the last time we were here in November, we dug a little bit into the registrations of the boats. And the next page, on page 16, we give you a timeline of what we were able to discover through researching the boat registrations with the state of Michigan. As you can see on the timeline, in March of 2013, Max Landing had 9 fishing boats that were registered, and they had sold 3 boats. The registrations in Michigan are good for 3 years. So in 2016, when the 3-year registrations of 2013 had expired, Max Landing did not renew any of those boat registrations. The sale was concluded to the East Shore Developing Company in December of 2016. In September of 2017, 5 former Max Landing fishing boats were registered in Dean Adams' personal name for personal and home use. And then Lakemore began operations in July of 2020. So what that all means, that timeline means, is that as of March of 2013, Max Landing had 9 registered fishing boats. And I believe an affidavit was submitted by Mr. Parker from the prior owner of Max Landing, who said that she had abandoned the rental of those boats in 2013. As of March of 2016, Max Landing abandoned all use of the fishing boats by failing to renew a single boat registration with the state of Michigan. Lakemore has never registered any of Max Landing's fishing boats with the state of Michigan. Those that are registered in Mr. Adams' personal name. Lakemore marketing materials and social media posts by the builder reveal that no boat rentals were carried out on the property for approximately 1,300 days, from December of 2016 to June of 2020. Lakemore itself did not register any boats for use at the resort until 2020, 4 years after Max Landing failed to re-register its boats in 2016. So these actions by Max Landing and Lakemore constitute a clear act of discontinuing the multi-boat access site and storage for more than 365 days, and clear act of omission evidencing a voluntary decision to abandon any transferable nonconformity from Max Landing. And I would ask you to look at the Livonia Hotel case versus the City of Livonia about that issue. It's really on point. It has to do with a restaurant that had a liquor license, that you may be familiar with it, and for 5 years they didn't operate. They were looking for a new operator for the restaurant, but they kept up their liquor license. And Michigan courts held in that situation that the use had not been abandoned because the registrations had been continued. In this case, it's just the opposite. The registrations were not continued. So Lakemore is resuming Max Landing's non-conforming use. And you have to look at it as a resumption. And a resumption, as stated in your ordinance, section 201, of a nonconformity is considered an extension or an enlargement. That requires approval of this body upon application for a variance. It cannot be approved by the zoning administrator or by the township planner. So I'm sorry about the PowerPoint. I wish it's visually more, to see the pictures up on the screen. It's more helpful, I think. However, I'm hoping that the copy of the presentation can be submitted into the record, you all conclude that the master plan and the ordinance prohibit Lake Moore's pontoon boat use and expanded dock system. Max Landing's use of aluminum fishing boats was abandoned and has been unlawfully resumed. The resumption itself, even if they were fishing boats, that would be considered an expansion under the law. So it is respectfully requested that you grant PFL's appeal of the zoning administrator's decision and deny Lake Moore's appeal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any board questions at this time for council? All right, thanks very much. All right, at this time, we'd like to hear from Mr. Wendling.
Well, I think my preference would be that, because we have to have the public hearing go through that, my purpose here is to help guide you as you get into decision making.
Of course.
And the information you hear at the public hearing is going to go into that, so I would defer to have the public hearing.
Okay. Therefore, at this time, we'd like to call on Leslie Couturier to tell us some rules for
Sure.
tonight's public input.
Okay. The purpose of the public comment is to give members of the public an opportunity to express their views and opinions to the members of this commission. To maintain order and ensure fairness to every speaker, the following rules must be followed during public comment. Speakers will approach the podium and introduce themselves by stating their name and address and to proceed to make their comment. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes and is only allowed to speak once on the same matter. Communication previously emailed to the commission is not necessary to read out loud. Public comment time may not be given to another member of the public. Any arrangement for speaking on behalf of others must be arranged prior to the meeting. When your time is at 2 minutes, 30 seconds, you will be alerted with a yellow signal, to wrap up your comment. And at 3 minutes, you will be alerted with a red signal, and the chair will ask you to conclude your comments. So high-tech.
Very good, thank you. All right, at this time, we'll open up this proceeding to the public. Please step up to the lectern and tell us what you'd like us to know.
My name is Karen Luke, 2896 Bass Bay Court. I do have something that I would like to show you because I disagree with, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but what he said about boats. He said a boat is a boat is a boat. Black's Law Dictionary defines a boat as, I'm sorry, I got to move something over here, a small open vessel or watercraft usually moved by oars or rowing. It is commonly distinguished in law from a ship or vessel being smaller in size and without a deck. That's Black's Law Dictionary. This one is a visual you kind of have to see because I thought it was interesting. Merriam-Webster actually has what they call boats. There's a kayak on there, and there's a canoe on there, and then there's bigger boats. As far as Merriam-Webster, those are all boats. Okay, going on to the next one. As far as boats, we're going to go to the U.S. Coast Guard. The U.S. Coast Guard says a vessel includes every description of watercraft or other artificial contrivance used capable of being used as a means of transportation on water. And they do have, I've got it highlighted, a paddleboard. So paddleboard, kayaks, and canoes are all boats. So in case you're confused, we have 3 different sources. Going forward, she covered a lot of my plans, man, she is good, from our Forest Lakes. The one thing that she did not talk to, this comes directly from the 2015 East Bay Plan, and it talks about keyholing. And it talks about the use of waterfront lot as a common open space for waterfront access for other than walk-in enjoyment is not contemplated. This so-called keyhole development is undesirable, especially in those cases where motorized watercraft are used. This high intensity of use of the water would likely result in significant degradation of the water quality. Their whole keyhole development is not desirable to the Forest Lakes area. So I think that's something we want to keep in mind with the number of boats. I only have a few minutes. The other thing, they would have to ask for a variance. I am a Realtor, and I do know that a variance, as far as compliance with the zoning laws, would cause undue hardship on the owner. Not having enough boats is not a hardship. If they bought them and they spent the money for them, that's just poor planning. That's not undue hardship. And then also a variance, the proposed is necessary for reasonable use of the property. High-speed boats are not necessary. They've got their cabins, they can rent them, they can make all their money from that. They don't need, the thing is the lake is our backyard. And we all share the lake, and one company should not get to have that much impact on our lake. The last point on the variance is the proposed variance would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. And I would disagree that it would alter our neighborhood greatly. It's just one of these things that the people who live there, we've only been on the lake since 2020, and the speeds of the boats, it's almost scary. I mean, I can go on a lot more about the master plan because he said a lot of what, how you ruled last time violated the master plan. It actually goes step by step with the master plan. I've got like 6 slides, but we don't have any way to show them. It's just one of those things that a boat is not a boat, and fishing boats, the one thing he did say, use is the intent. The intent of a fishing boat is a lot different than the use of a tritune, where they say you can't fish on them. They're to run people around at high speeds on our lake. And not everybody who rents boats on the lake are bad people, but you know what? If you're not a resident of the area, you don't have the same interest in keeping the area safe. And there's a lot of kids that we would like to play on our lake. We're right across from the girls' camp. And that's a really narrow neck between lakes 3 and 4. And you would not believe that people are going there. It's hard to swim off our point. And it's just, this should not be from people who don't know our lake and they don't follow it, and it makes it very unsafe. High-speed boats don't belong. On Lake Moore's own page, the other lawyer disagreed with it, but they said the average depth of the lake is 4 feet. That's off of Lake Moore's website. I've got the slide, too. So the average depth is 4 feet. We don't need 140 and 200-ton horsepower motors running around. That does stir up the bottom. It ruins the natural areas, and I'm sorry, I guess that's it. It's not something we want.
Thank you. Who would like to be next?
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Sensoli. My address is 9741 Liberty Road, Chelsea, Michigan. My local address is 2014 North Avenue on Arbutus Lake, and that identifies a humble cottage that was built by my grandparents 60 years ago, which has been enjoyed by generations of Millars and Sensolis ever since. First, I'd like to thank all of you for your service to the community and the township. I am a planning commissioner myself for Lima Township outside of Ann Arbor, and I understand the difficulties that serving your township in this way and taking the time and energy and offering your expertise, your good judgment is very valuable, and that's stewardship, and that's what helps to maintain this township as a special place that it is, by taking care of the community, the people, and the land here. So I appreciate you. My comment tonight is regarding the accuracy of finding of fact number 3 and number 4. It's important to make these corrections to the official record, particularly in preparation for future litigation. Number 3, currently reads, the Board of Appeals finds that Lakemore received site plan approval for a cabin court on January 9th, 2018, and was also approved for a supplemental site plan amendment on June 29th, 2021. In actuality, on June 29th, 2021, the Planning Commission recommended approval of an amended site plan subject to specific conditions. As shown in the meeting minutes, Lakemore's legal counsel negotiated a 90-day deadline to allow adequate time to make the required modifications. As of today, some 252 days later, the township is still awaiting completion of said modifications. Therefore, the approval is still outstanding. The wording of finding of fact number 4 should also be updated to read, quote, "conditional approval," or, quote, "approval subject to conditions." In addition, I'd like to ask that you please vote to approve Protect Forest Lake's appeal of total abandonment of boats and docks at Lakemore Resort. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Who's next, please?
Hi there, David Endicott at 702 East Arbutus Lake Road, Traverse City, Michigan. In the spirit of compromise, the Township Zoning Administrator in June 21 extended a nonconforming use. Lakemore rejected the compromise. We now know the following from Gail's presentation. A nonconforming use can't be extended. The ZBA and, or the ZA and the ZBA can approve an extension. And furthermore, the nonconforming use was abandoned. And that timeline that she showed in the presentation, it said it all. I mean, it almost was a mic drop. There were no fishing boats registered as commercial boats in 316. That's a matter of record. It's fact. 5 fishing boats were registered as pleasure craft by Dean Adams, pleasure craft, not Lakemore, in 917. Again, that's a fact. Lakemore clearly abandoned the nonconforming use by failing to register fishing boats under a commercial registration before 317. Another fact. Even if you were to reject the abandonment argument, then Section 201 comes into play. And 201 of the ordinance states that a lawful nonconforming use may be changed to a less objectionable or more restricted nonconforming use by way of a variance application approved by the zoning board. This language is provided on the basis that the new use should be more conforming to the ordinance, which is a move intended to eventually eliminate the nonconformity. Based upon what Protect Forest Lakes has presented this evening, what Lakemore has done is clearly not in line with this logic. So, in summary, based on the fact that nonconforming use was abandoned, that the use can't be extended, and that Section 201 of the ordinance states that a nonconforming use should be less, not more, I urge you, absolutely urge you, to approve Protect Forest Lakes appeal and help, please help alleviate the adverse effects Lakemore has produced to the homeowners of Arbutus Lake. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello. My name is Roxanne Foster. I am an East Bay Township resident at 728 Lake George Trail. I'm here to read a letter from my mother-in-law, Susan Foster, who is unable to be with us today. Her address is 2109 Gibbs Road on Arbutus Lake number 2. Thank you for the opportunity to express my thoughts before you make this important decision. I'm here to share a safety concept with you following a 22-year career as a compliance consultant for regulations including MIOSHA. I have written many safety site plans and trained my clients on safe reporting issues. Incident reportings under OSHA require incidents be logged by their severity. The lowest level reportable incident is a near miss. Incident severity rises through property damage incidents, to minor injury incidents, to serious incidents, with the highest level being an incident that results in a fatality. A long-held axiom among safety professionals is that if you ignore a near-miss incident condition long enough, The law of large numbers guarantees an eventual fatality. And you can never know whether it will be the 10th or the 1,000th incident when that fatality occurs. With that notion in front of you, I want to share with you that when the state first proposed a larger public boat launch on Lake 4, and the Lake Number 5 public launch was abandoned by the East Bay Township Parks Commission, a carrying capacity study was conducted to ascertain how many motorized boats could safely operate on the available acres of the surface. That's after deducting 100 feet from each shoreline, which is the distance a boat throwing a wake is supposed to stay from the shore. The study first factored in account of both non-motorized and power boats available to be operated by riparian owners. The original proposal for the new Lake 4 launch was parking for 28 vehicles and 28 trailers. The carrying capacity study resulted in reducing the allotted space from 28 to 20. That year, we had only 127 riparian owners on the lake. The Ceylon Shore development alone has added 24 additional lots for development, and several other larger properties have also been subdivided. As of today, we have more than 190 lots circling Arbutus Lake. With increased numbers of riparian owners, it is hard to believe that Arbutus is now already pushing the envelope regarding the number of boats moving on the lake at any given time. I realize the need to balance the riparian owner's rights against the potential safety issues created by heavy boat traffic. However, with the numerous safety issues already reported to the Sheriff's Marine Division, I can't imagine that it would be in any way advisable to consider adding more boats to the count than are currently allowed. To do so would inevitably increase our near-miss count, and therefore bring us nearer to eventual serious injury or fatality. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard tonight, and for putting the safety of our neighbors, our children, and our grandchildren at the forefront of your deliberations.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I am Robert Parker. I'm an attorney here this evening on behalf of Casey and Dana Cowell, who are the owners of Real Estado, which is a family-owned LLC, owns property directly adjacent to this property. And in general, we're supportive of the zoning administrator's decision, and I think there's a lot of merit to it. I think he's had a tough decision and drew a bright line. A couple of things I'd like to point out, though. Looking at the materials from November, it seemed to me as though central to this was drawing a bright line, and what was the prior use. And we had a lot of Google Maps and a lot of sort of, not strange, but muddled information about what was done there before. We had an affidavit from Ms. Adams, which was 2016, which really didn't help us in terms of what existed prior to that. So we did a little bit of spade work and went back through the chain of title. We were at a chain of title back from when this property was established. And we were able to establish that the property was, in the latter years, owned by the Moritz family. And as Gail has pointed out in her timeline, Mr. Moritz passed away in 2010. We were able to locate his widow, Sandra, who still lives in Traverse City, and she operated this Max Landing from the date of his death until she sold it in December, and I believe it was December of 2016. So she was intimately aware of the operations there prior to it going to its current owners. She was clear, though, that while her husband was alive, this was sort of his baby, and she really wasn't active in it. But anyway, we had a chance to talk to her, and in my submission, I included an affidavit from her, which I think kind of clears up quite a bit. To some degree, it's consistent with the affidavit, I guess, provided by Mr. Peterson. I haven't seen that, but Mark indicated that maybe in the early stages, there were 12 boats there. And I think that's consistent with her affidavit. She indicates on in paragraph 6, in 2010, Max Landing owned approximately 12 fishing boats. However, there's a couple of things I want to draw your attention to. One is paragraph 8 of her affidavit, and she says this. She says, in 2012 or through 13, Max Landing sold all of its small motors and 4 of its rowboats, leaving a total of approximately 8 rowboats available. I would submit to you that under Section 201, that is clear and active intent of a partial discontinuance of a nonconforming use. In other words, it doesn't have to all go away. Your ordinance allows for a partial discontinuance, and I would submit to you that there is evidence right there of a partial discontinuance, and that's your bright line, probably 8 rowboats. The other thing that I think is important to note, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't watching.
Could you wrap up, please?
I'm sorry, I wasn't watching it. I'll just leave it with this, is in her affidavit, she indicates that the boats were made available free to the residents. What I understand now is we have a boat rental business going on. I think that's a completely different kettle of fish. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And who would like to speak next? Yes, sir.
So I'm Mike Bobrowski, 2200 Gibbs Road. And I'm a full-time resident on the lake for about 22 years, full-time and all year long. I was 20 years on the Arbutus Lake Association, 8 years as the president of the Lake Association, so I've got a lot of history on the lake. It seems like the kind of the end goal here is to put Lakemore out of business, and I don't think that's appropriate. Yes, there's pontoon rentals, things have changed on the lake, traffic patterns have changed, but it's it's always changing. And the Salem property, anybody who built a home there, that wasn't there when we moved there. I don't like those houses. I don't like those boats. But things do change on the lake. And we have to, look to see, safety is obviously an issue. We have a public boat launch, so we get a lot of boats from the other lakes that come in, so that, adds to the traffic. And anybody that moves on the lake also adds to the traffic. So currently they have, on-site people that work, for their marina, and that'll help with the safety, obviously. It's not going to eliminate problems, because you always have somebody who's going to do something foolish, but it's no different than anybody else doing something foolish on the lake. We see people all the time doing dumb things. So I don't think the boat numbers, like especially kayaks, kayaks and the paddle boards, things like that, those are kind of a device that's almost like rafts more than a physical boat. I know the definition of a boat is for transportation, but that's a totally solitude use, and I don't see that being a problem myself. I'm concerned, though, if we do force them to sell the resort, that would go into 8 or 9 different residents, okay, and it would change. That would really change things on the lake. We have 10 boats ourselves. If you start counting kayaks, paddle boards, fishing boats, and things like that. So if you want to have an impact, if that goes to a private ownership of those houses, that could be a real big impact on the lake, especially if each one of those had a wake boat, because the wake boats are highly do a lot of damage, or can possibly do a lot of damage to the lakes. So I think and Max Landing, since we've been there, it's been a variety of different things. I mean, it's been crazy over there. Certain times they've had bass tournaments on the lake, and had other big functions and stuff like that. So having the rental properties and things is not unusual. So thank you for your time, and appreciate you guys with your decisions.
Thank you. All right, who would like to speak?
Good evening. My name is Ralph Bednarz. I reside at 1380 Autumn Trail on Rennie Lake. I'm a professional limnologist, retired from the state of Michigan, Department of the DNR and the DEQ after a 38-year career in water resources assessment and management. I commented about the Forest Lakes District inland lakes and the importance of protecting them to the Planning Commission at the May 10th, 2021 and June 29, 2021 meetings in regards to the Lakemore Resort development. The loss of natural shorelines is the biggest threat to the overall health of Michigan lakes. The removal of native plants exposes the shorelines to erosive effects of waves from recreational boating, including large pontoon boats and wake boats with increasing horsepower that produce larger wakes. The relatively small, shallow lakes of the Forest Lakes districts, including Arbutus Lake, are especially vulnerable to erosive forces of wakes produced by large horsepower boats. The boats provided at Max Landing were 14-foot V-hull boats with outboard motors of 10 horsepower or less. The current fleet of boats provided at the Lakemore Resort is 22-foot Tritoons with 140 horsepower engines. The size of the boat wake is directly related to the horsepower in the boat hull design. Large horsepower pontoon boats can create large wakes that produce destructive forces at the shoreline, especially on small, shallow lakes. Now, I can talk about the aesthetics, the safety, the ecological integrity, but I've already done that in my previous comments, so I'll defer to you to look at those. Thus, I respectfully request the Zoning Board of Appeals reconsider, I guess, their draft finding that the horsepower of any given boat's engine or lack of an engine is not a relevant factor with respect to the continuation of the lawful nonconforming boat use. The horsepower of the Lakemore Resort fleet should be limited to the historical total horsepower of the Max Landing boats in a similar formula that was used to derive the allowed total boat size. Thank you for appreciating my comments, and thank you for your service to East Bay Township and to its residents.
Thank you.
Good evening. Caitlin Falensky, 660 East Arbutus Lake Road. Please allow me to clarify the intent of this appeal. It is not to put them out of business. Boat rental is not their main business focus. It is an amenity they want to offer that is not permitted in the lakes area. This is not a personal issue, and Lakemore selling to someone else is a major concern for all of us, which is why we need to ensure that the rules are accurate and in place. It does not matter who you are. No citizen is above the rules of this township. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to speak?
If I may, just a little housekeeping. Being the representative of my group and clients, I would request that I have additional time to respond to all the comments from the individuals that made their comments this evening at this public hearing.
If you don't mind, would like to defer and get our council's instructions, and then we'll allow you additional time. Thank you. Are there any other non-presenters who wish to speak this evening? All right, hearing none, we'll close this portion of the appeal to the public, and we'll open it up to the board for instructions from Mr. Wendling and potential action this evening. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the public knows, my name is Peter Wendling of Young, Graham, and Wendling and Bel Air attorneys, and we represent East Bay amongst other municipal entities throughout northern Michigan. A couple of housekeeping things. There was an interesting comment about the fact that the site plan approval and the amended site plan was with conditions. I can put that in there, but I've never seen one that didn't have conditions, including special use permit, but that's correct, information. The second issue is the boats themselves. There is no variance possibility related to the boats because the issue is a use, and I don't believe East Bay Charter Townships retain the ability to grant use variances. I don't recall that being the case, so the variance is really not, not the issue here. Further, the definition of boat is handled through the township zoning ordinance. It's in the finding of fact, and that's the definition you have to follow. The only strong point I have, and then I'll get into the variations and as to what you can go ahead and decide. It does involve the docking issue. If Lakemore had docks out there, but there were no boats to begin with, and we weren't dealing with the boats, and people were just tossing a fishing line off the end of the dock, there would be no discussion of the docks or their size. It's not contained in the zoning ordinance. Of course, there is a finding in here that you could decide that the docks are limited to 400 square feet. You absolutely have your right to make that decision. I think that part would be difficult for me to defend given the language of the zoning ordinance. Also, when people read the proposed findings of fact, obviously there are contrary findings. You're not going to be using all of them. You're going to be picking some. You may be creating some of your own. If you pick a couple, the others will be falling by the wayside depending upon your opinion. The zoning administrator did the best job he could as far as determining what the scope of a lawful non-conforming use is. The findings have that, an explanation as to what is a lawful non-conforming use. And I know that the township and many other ordinances have, if you don't use it for 365 days, meaning 1 year, it's gone. The law says no, that's not alone sufficient. Time can be used to determine whether a lawful non-conforming use has been voluntarily relinquished, but the key term is voluntary relinquishment, and whether or not it's been voluntarily eliminated. And you have some evidence presented, with this McGregor's presentation here, which we didn't have before in November. The other housekeeping issue involves the separate parcel. Clearly, we're talking about only the Max Landing parcel. To the extent that there's a separate parcel that never had any type of resort or boat use whatsoever that comes under the ownership or as part of the ownership of Max Landing, and the council for Lakemore will address that. That is not an area where a lawful non-conforming use has been established. It's strictly related to the activity of the resort and the resort property, period. When the zoning administrator made his decision, we took the unusual step of looking at the square footage of the fishing boats. In fact, Mr. Parker did the same thing with his recent letter. And although I'm not a mathematician, if I was, I'd be doing something else for a living. I did find a formula related to how to find out a square foot area of your typical 14-foot fishing skiff, and came up with a figure of 74.2 square feet based upon a formula, which I simply looked at, off of the internet. So the information provided Mr. Parker, if you had a reduction in the number of boats on Mr. Parker, would put it a little over 400 square feet. The zoning administrator made a decision of 630 square feet based upon the information on hand. And Lakemore wishes the panel to look at additional information and perhaps additional votes that were on site, but the zoning administrator made his decision at the time based on the information that he had on hand. The reason we went, and the reason the zoning administrator went with the square footage was, unfortunately, there really isn't. I mean, you have a broad definition of boats under the zoning ordinance, and frankly, that definition appears to include pretty much every type of boat that exists. If that's the way it applies, then you have to take the mass of the boats that existed as best proved to the zoning administrator, which is what the zoning administrator did, and make that determination, and therefore went with the square footage as opposed to the type of the boat. I know it's a big argument here. Generally, lawful non-conforming uses are supposed to be of the same character and scope of, if they're continued as to the extent that they existed at the time they became lawful non-conforming, meaning when the ordinance changed. And we also know that in the Lakes Area District, it's very specific that you can't have your public access site for multiple boats, whether it's a privately owned property providing that access site, and that's what it applies to, is privately owned property in this case. But, none of the attorneys, and nor could I find a case that specifically addressed, the scope and extent of the lawful non-conforming use related to either the length, size of the boat, or the horsepower of the motor, or the lack thereof. It just didn't exist. There's peripheral cases. Mr. McKellar cited one involving the truck case, the difference between the size and so forth. When we talked about this a bit at the planning commission level, there's another case that talks where a junkyard was in place. It was a lawful non-conforming use. That junkyard largely had scrap metal, and that was about it, all sorts of scrap metal. It changed ownership and then started processing junk cars, but whole vehicles. And the township said, wait a minute, you've changed the nature of what you were doing there, right? That is no longer just, people dumping scrap in there. Now you have junk cars, and the court said, we don't care what kind of junk is going into the junkyard, whether it's an Austin Martin that's trashed, or whether it's a piece of metal from some other non-automotive source, to the court, junk is junk. So there is case law leaning in the direction saying, boat's a boat. And that leads right back to the zoning administrator's decision to say, well, the boat's a boat, and we have a very broad definition. Let's look at the mass of boats that were proven at the time to exist, and make a decision based upon the mass with the best information possible. So the two main areas of focus here for the ZBA is A, is it a lawful non-conforming use? Was there any involuntary abandonment? If there wasn't, what is the mass of the boats, and did the zoning administrator make the best decision possible given the information he had as to the volume of boats? You have now conflicting information. You have Mr. Parker, a lesser number of boats that he provided. Is that more appropriate? You could also try and go and delve into the issue of the horsepower. I'm not sure that's a successful, would be a successful matter, but who knows? Maybe we'll be creating new case law, because regardless of your decision, this case is definitely going to circuit court and perhaps the Court of Appeals, maybe even to the state Supreme Court. So don't worry about that, though, right? Just do the best you can with the information that you have. It's going to be appealed. That's the way it is.
No pressure.
That's normal. It's not pressure. I mean, I think it's an absence of it, because it doesn't matter which way you go, it's going to happen, okay? And then, of course, the other issue to consider is there sufficient information presented by the appellant for Protect Forest Lakes related to an abandonment, given the information that occurred there. So those are really going to be the two areas that we focus on. And if you determine there is a lawful non-conforming use, there's the additional question of how much. I do recommend using the square footage. It's the best rubric. The judge may say no. We're going to look at something else here. We're going to look at the same type, and that'll be the new law. Okay, and that's fine, because again, there's no cases directly on point related to the boats and the horsepower. Obviously, there's reasoning behind the zoning ordinance as to why the township wanted to restrict this type of use here. It's not just a keyholing issue; it's an issue of private ownership. You went from a resort to a cabin court, which is pretty much the same type of use. Cabin courts now are no longer allowed under the zoning ordinance. But the continuity of the use between Max Landing and Lake Moore is roughly the same as far as the use, but again, people didn't like the scope of it, all right, at the planning commission level. But it's the use itself. So that's basically the decision-making process. We've put in here general findings of fact, which contain the germane definitions contained in the zoning ordinance. During your discussions, I do recommend that you have a question of staff, that you ask staff a question. If you have a question of either the applicants or the appellants, rather, in this case, that you ask them questions to flesh things out. You can use some of the findings. You're not going to be able to use them all because they're not necessarily consistent with each other. You can also add your own. And we have added exhibits, obviously, tonight, including the PowerPoint, which don't worry about the numbering on there. We'll add them in, in proper number for the record after they're done. But feel free to use those exhibits. In fact, if you come up with no findings, I encourage you to make sure that you have some exhibits that support the findings that you come up with tonight. I do now.
All right, thank you. And just to keep our commitment, I'd like to invite the appellants up one at a time, give each 3 minutes, and you can do your housekeeping, as you mentioned.
Okay. I may run over, 3 minutes is a little bit to address all the issues, but what is before you tonight is really, and Mr. Wendling was correct, is the request related to the nonconformity. I want to be clear again, we weren't aware in the original decision, SN9 boats, that we may have had these additional boats. We were unaware of information about that. It wasn't until we realized that it sounded like we, in fact, likely had 12 boats that we came to the township and said, we'd like, actually, originally an administrative amendment, just essentially the same square footage per boat, add 3 boats. It was recommended we come before this board. We didn't appeal it to say he did it wrong necessarily. We appealed it to add the boats that, in fact, were appropriate under the interpretation, which was the 2001 establishment of non-conforming use. While we were there, we also, decided that it makes sense to review the boats in the multiple argument that, in fact, a boat is a boat. You've heard my argument on that. I'm not going to dwell on it because I want to address the square footage issue. Abandonment has to be proven by the township based on facts. The township is the burden holder of proof of abandonment. I've got a client who said they didn't have intent. With all due respect, Mr. Parker's affidavit doesn't say it was abandoned. It's an implication they make. But if Sandra wanted to say abandoned, she very well could have said she abandoned those uses with intent. Okay? She didn't say she abandoned those uses with intent. The applicant's failure to register the boats is not proof that they didn't rent the boats. They may have done it incorrectly under the administrative rules under the DNR, but that in and of itself is not proof that they abandoned the boats. I don't think that's funny at all. I think that's a fact. That's a legal fact that if you drive a car without your registration for a day, that doesn't mean you didn't drive your car. Okay? That's the reality of the matter. And the fact that the applicant submitted an application in 2018 to change the use of the structures is also not an abandonment of a separate use. Okay? Property Y we're not addressing, we don't utilize property Y for boats to be used at Lake Moore. As you see in those photos, there's a dock there, but we don't have boats there. If someone takes a kayak there, that's fine, but we're not using the boats there, so we're in full compliance, okay? The master plan issue, I would note that actually the master plan clearly identifies that the only exception to not having multiple boat access sites is actually cabin courts. So the master plan is inconsistent with your zoning ordinance. So if we want to look at that, we ought to take a hard look at it. But I would say that the zoning ordinance prevails, but the fact is the master plan is not a perfect tool here. We appreciate the fact of concerns with safety, and we appreciate the fact with those items throughout the lake. But the fact is and remains that many of the neighbors have their own boats, multiple boats, boats of the same speed. And from the docks of Lake Moore, you look across the lake, there's an entire DNR permitted wakeboarding and ski course, okay? And so if we're looking at impacts, I'm concerned that we need to look at broader issues, and I don't think we want to look at interpreting, restricting what could be 8 or 7 properties on their own that could be kind of minimized and utilized on their own for multiple boats from being able to use at least, their average amount of boats. So with that, I would ask that you look at the 2001 boat usage, which is the boats and the kayaks. You have to find proof of abandonment. I don't think it exists. And at the very minimum, like we said, we would default. We don't necessarily disagree with the calculation. We think it's a reasonable, bright line to make an interpretation. We did not reject that. We just sought an alternative argument in seeking that. So we didn't necessarily reject their interpretation. We do find that formula reasonable, and the alternative to a boat is a boat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You can replace one. Sorry. All right, I wanted to address, I wanted to have you focus on what your job is here. You're not here to decide whether Lakemore goes out of business. You're not here to think about broader issues with respect to the lake. That's not your job tonight. Those issues are dealt with in other bodies. Your only job tonight is to determine what does your ordinance say, and can you, according to what the ordinance says, approve either of these appeals, okay? That's what your job is. So let's not go into broader issues, because that's just a diversion. We don't need to do that. I want to cite a case to you, a Michigan Court of Appeals case, Garb K. versus Carrollton Township. It's 86 Mishap 350. It's a 1978 case. That case held, based on a body of case law in Michigan, that the continuation of a nonconforming use must be of substantially the same size, intensity, and essential nature that existed at the time of the passage of the ordinance. It is clear at the time of the passage of the ordinance that we had aluminum fishing boats and we had 10-by-4 dock sections. That is a fact, okay? And a change, an expansion of that, or a resumption of something that's greater is an expansion under your ordinance, and this body cannot approve that, okay? Mr. McKellar, I believe, I'm sorry, I hope I got your name right. He said just a minute ago that if they didn't register the boats, doesn't mean that they weren't rented. When you have a conformity, it has to be legal in order for it to be continued, a continued nonconformity. Once it becomes illegal, it's not a nonconformity that you all can allow to continue, okay? So if the boats weren't registered and they were rented, that's an illegal usage of those boats, and it's no longer a legal nonconformity, okay? That's what I wanted to say about that. I think that's all that I had. Oh, also, we do have 2 packets of the boat registration. I want you to have that. Please submit that into the record also. I have them. Thank you very much. You have a hard job.
Thank you.
What you do.
All right, we'll close this to the public and the presenters at this time and open it up to the board for discussion and possible action. Where would you like to start?
Well, I got quite a few things, actually. So PFL doesn't want any, even 9 or 12 fishing boats rentals to continue? Is that my understanding? Can someone answer that question?
I can answer that for you.
That's what they
That's-
want? No,
yes, and
not
that's-
even?
and part of that's what's presented.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just want to make it clear for that. So let's say that goes through, which I'm not even gonna go there right now. So let's say I rent a cabin and I bring my own boat. Can I moor it right in front of their, I can moor it anywhere on that lake, right? Including in front of their resort?
Well, the question is where, they can't bring the boat in through Lakemore, okay?
I could bring it to public access.
Bring it to public access.
And I can have
you
100,
have a
200
right of
horse.
temporary- you have a right of
And I can have a
navigation
200
or
horse.
temporary anchorage, that's correct, that's under the law there.
Yeah.
The difference is that they bring it in there and say, I'm gonna keep it here for a week. I would argue that that is not allowed. That's not the same as a temporary acreage.
Okay. And then 3 of the 5 lakes there are no wake, right?
Well, the no wake is not in.
That's what I mean, but I'm just wondering, because I hear about the wake impact and all that. I thought it was 1, 5, isn't the one next to it when you go into, right from the public access, you hang a right, which one's that?
Between 1 and 2. 1 and 2, there's no wake.
That's 4, and it's a little too shallow to have a wake in.
So there's,
It's under 3 feet, so you're.
yeah, I know, I fish out there all the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's, I got more, but I'll let everyone else talk.
Several questions.
Please.
If I see, I'm concerned when we hear about this parcel why Mr. McKellar made a statement that they may pull up kayaks, but according to a definition, a kayak is still considered a boat. So wouldn't that be expanding that use onto that additional parcel?
Yeah, and again, your decision-making process here is only involving the Max Landing property. Anything else is an enforcement issue related to the zoning
Okay.
administrator. So,
I just-
yes, but let's focus on the Max Landing property.
And then, Mr. Wendling, do you have any legal opinion on the proof of registration considered to be an abandonment, or is that, you've just been handed that information, is that too soon to tell?
Handed that information, but every piece of evidence counts, so you can certainly consider that. Is it possible to rent boats without a registration? Probably can get away with anything, you can do whatever, but, is that alone sufficient evidence of an abandonment? That's part of what you're going to be deciding today. Is that either alone or a piece of the evidence, of other pieces of evidence, on whether you consider it the lawful non-conforming use existing or abandoned?
Could I ask a question here? Is it my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the reason why you register a boat and it's required to be registered is because there's a motor? That if there's no motor, the boat does not have to be registered?
I don't think that's correct, yeah. My recollection is that, I have a motorboat, and I don't do a lot of non-motorized.
No, if I had a rowboat and,
The rowboat still has to be registered, yeah. I believe it does.
no, I mean, okay.
I don't know directly. I can't give you an answer on the registration. To the extent that these boats were registered apparently, so let's presume that the boats that were in place required some sort of registration, because why would they have it if they weren't? And so just consider that you had boats here that required a registration, and they were registered, and at some point they weren't.
Yeah, I was just
Now,
theorizing that when they sold all the motors and kept 8 boats and continued to rent them, that they were skirting around the fact that they were no longer had motors, but they still could rent them because but I could be wrong. I was just curious.
yeah, and you have the affidavits, and maybe, the affidavits are either sometimes missing information related to the detail of whether they're registered or not.
Yeah, it
That's
just
part
seems
of
that some of it's tied together date-wise, and it seems that it said, we got rid of the motors, we kept the boats, and we rented them out. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, okay. And the square footage makes sense to me in my little logical peanut brain here, but I also can't ignore the increased intensity, because one of the things about a zoning ordinance is to promote health, safety, and welfare. So I'm concerned about the health, safety, and welfare, not only about the state of the lake, but about the people on the lake. So I feel like that's something I can't ignore.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Just one clarification. I've paid attention through all the complex information here, and I think I've got a pretty good handle on it. But just to be clear, these are 2 competing appeals, but the finding of facts is associated with both of them, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Because ultimately what your decision is, there will be either a mix where nobody's happy with it,
Right.
or there's a decision where one side is happy with the other is not, or vice versa. Correct.
Okay. And then the discussion from Mr. McKellar about adding additional boats, is that included in their appeal here?
Anybody, including the public, and that's what happens when you submit, a record up to the time that you're making your deliberations. You can consider all of the evidence that's presented to you as part of your deliberation.
Okay.
Dave?
Sir?
Yeah, looking at all this, and thinking about the fact that we define what a boat is as anything that can transport somebody, though personally, I don't know if I would agree with it. I wouldn't want to go across the ocean in a rowboat. It all depends on enough money, what the heck. But be that as it may, it seems that with this conflict, the only way is trying to get a common denominator. And therefore, I have to agree that the common denominator would be the square foot as far as determining eventual size. My only other question is that, and this is really out there, what is the current inventory of boats at Lakemore right now?
There's right now 5 or 4 of the original rowboats, and I think we have 4 pontoons.
Kayaks, canoes?
Yeah.
There's roughly,
Could I have you speak at the lectern?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry about that. There's currently 4 rowboats, the original rowboats, and there are 4 pontoons. And the reason partially is, and I do want to make this clear, I think it's important, Carl brought this up, with clarification. Actually, not only did our affidavit, but Sandra's affidavit indicated that the renters historically were permitted to bring their own boats, moor them, dock them, and keep them there for their entire stay. So, if someone drops a boat off at the public launch, brings it in, and in fact, that's how we've been operating outside of the square feet, is that Lakemore Rentals would bring a boat, someone would rent it, they drop there for the week, it would move, and there's actually complaints about them moving and stuff like that, but we were operating under that procedure. Kayak-wise, this is kind of why we think, that's the third part of our argument, is the kayaks are so innocuous, and they're ubiquitous as well as like paddleboards, that we don't think it's really appropriate under the boat definition, and therefore it doesn't count. But right now, we do have, how many kayaks average?
I would approximate probably between 15 and 20 kayaks, and probably about 15 stand-up paddleboards. Some of the kayaks are for kids. They're smaller in size.
Okay, and could you please tell us who you are?
My name is Tricia Adams. I'm one of the co-owners, and I manage the resort.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, you said 4 pontoons, just want to clarify that.
Right now, last year, they utilized 4 pontoons and 4 of the rowboats with motors.
Are the pontoons owned by Lakemore?
Lakemore Marine rents and so they lease the ones directly to Lakemore Resort that stay on site. They rent ones that go to renters that are above and beyond the ones that are permitted on site permanently. So it'd be like Sunset Motorsport. They could call up Sunset, rent a boat, it could stay there for a week. It's just Lakemore Marine, which is a separate company but related, rents those boats directly to those individuals for the week or their stay. There are certain boats that stay there permanently under the square footage that was currently permitted, and those are through, like a lease. They're leased out to Lakemore Resort.
Who's the registered owner of those pontoons?
It's Lakemore Rentals, right? Or Lakemore Marine is the one who rents those boats. And I don't actually think ownership really matters at this point. I think that's a separate concept altogether, but.
Any other questions?
No, thanks. There may be something else, but.
Thank you.
If I can make comments, I don't want us to be.
Of course. Yes, sir.
I don't think it makes a difference. Okay, the first burden of proof, of course, is on the property owner to show the existence of a lawful non-conforming use. I put that in the findings there, but it wasn't discussed tonight. And it really doesn't make a difference whether the boats were there because somebody brought them there, for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whether they're rented or owned. It has to do with proving the existence of the number of boats on the property. So other than the temporary rights of navigation in Anchorage, which under the law is basically 24 hours, if it's there for a longer period of time, whether it's owned by Lakemore, whether it's owned by the renter, whether it's rented and placed there for a period of property, it counts as a boat on the site. Now, I suppose someone could rent a boat for 24 hours and decide the next day I'd like to rent it again after they return it to the boat launch and so forth, and do that for 7 days in a row because that's the right of Anchorage. And I had a client come in one time on a property owner in Torch Lake, and they said, I don't like this ice shanty in front of my property. I said, well, there's not much you can do about it because under Michigan law, you have a right of navigation, and that ice shanty is navigating. This is really slow. Okay? So don't worry about whether it's a rented boat or one owned by Lakemore or not. It's the number of boats for a period of time other than those that are there for a temporary overnight anchorage, which could be any boat, including those of riparian owners who decide to go and drop an anchor 110 feet or whatever off the shore of Lakemore, overnight. But beyond that, that's not the issue. It's how many boats, period, regardless of the source.
Thank you. All right, anything more? All right, what do you think, board? Should we move on to the findings of fact? They begin on page 155. And in a previous board meeting, we had a similar setup where we read through, discussed, and took an informal tally of our support. Do you wish to proceed in that manner tonight, or do something different? Good? All right. So, general findings of fact applicable to both applicants' appeals and Lakemore's request for interpretation of the definition of boat in the zoning ordinance. Number one, the Board of Appeals finds that the property at issue, now known as Lakemore Resort, is located on approximately 10.45 acres and has a street address of 2323 Salin Road, Traverse City, Michigan, and has a property identification number of 28-03-109-008-00 and 28-03-109-008-10. Okay, that's, just raise your hand if you have issue with any of the following six. The Board of Appeals finds that Lakemore is located in the Lakes Area Zoning District with a portion also located in the Forest Lakes Overlay District, as shown in Exhibit 1. Number three, the Board of Appeals finds that Lakemore received site plan approval for a cabin court on January 9th, 2018, and was also approved for a supplemental site plan amendment on June 29th, 2021, as shown on Exhibit 11. Number four, the Board of Appeals finds that at the time Lakemore received site plan approval, they did so as a cabin court, which was a permitted use in the Lakes Area Zoning District, as shown in Exhibits 1, 10, and 11. Number five, the Board of Appeals finds that under Section 405.2.I, or should that be a 1? I think a 1, that boats access sites for multiple boats as defined in the East Bay Charter Township zoning ordinance are not permitted, as shown in Exhibit 1. And number six, the Board of Appeals finds that the definition of boat under the East Bay Charter Township zoning ordinance is as follows. It means every description of watercraft used or capable of being used as a means of transportation on water. All right, and on to number 7. The Board of Appeals finds that boat access is defined under the East Bay Charter Township zoning ordinance as follows. It means to include boat launching, mooring, docking, and overnight anchoring within 50 feet of the shore from or incidental to a single private riparian property, public or private road and abutting an inland lake and/or private multi-boat access site. See Exhibit 1. Number 8, the Board of Appeals finds that boat access site for multiple boats is defined under the zoning ordinance as follows. Boat access site for multiple boats shall mean a facility which extends into or over the lake or provides dry docking space for mooring or docking of boats for use during the boating season. The facility for the mooring or docking of a boat or boats owned and operated exclusively by a single family residing in one family unit shall not be included within the definition meaning of multi-boat access site, where the docking or mooring facility is property which is owned exclusively by such family and which is contiguous part of the property on which the dwelling is situated. Exhibit 1. Number 9. The Board of Appeals finds that nonconforming use is defined in the zoning ordinance as follows. Any building or land lawfully occupied by a use as of September 25, 1976, or subsequent amendment to this ordinance, which does not conform to the passage of this ordinance or amendment thereto, with a use requirement of the district in which it is situated. Thank you. Number 10, the Board of Appeals finds that Section 201 of the zoning ordinance requires that a discontinuance of a nonconforming use, either in whole or in part, shall mean that there must be clear, active intent or omission on the part of the owner, which clearly shows a voluntary decision to abandon. See zoning ordinance section 201 or exhibit 1, section 201. Number 11, the Board of Appeals finds that it is a long-standing principle of Michigan law that an artificial deadline of 1 year of non-use constitutes an abandonment of a lawful nonconforming use without any other evidence does not in and of itself determine the abandonment of a lawful nonconforming use. And they cite some case law here. Are we good so far, Board? All right. Number 12, the Board of Appeals finds that the burden of establishing a nonconforming use under Michigan law is on the property owner. Number 13, the Board of Appeals finds that Protect Forest Lakes, hereinafter PFL, is a group of homeowners in the township, some of whom own homes on Arbutus Lake, who as a group are appealing the allowance of any lawful nonconforming boats, and that Lakemore has abandoned any lawful nonconforming use, which, to the extent it ever existed, was only related to 12 to 14 fishing boats at Max Landing, having either no motors or motors not greater than 9 horsepower. And I would amend that to be 9.9 horsepower as presented tonight.
Yeah, that's one where given the additional evidence, you can work around that.
All right, thank you. On to number 14, it says the Board of Appeals finds that the East Bay Charter Township zoning ordinance does not regulate the size or square footage of docks. See Exhibit 1. 15, the Board of Appeals finds that the law in the state of Michigan relating to abandonment of lawful nonconforming use is that it must be something more than mere non-use to show an abandonment of a nonconforming use. There must be an intention to abandon the right to the lawful nonconforming use, and that the burden of proof to show such abandonment is on the municipality seeking the elimination of the lawful nonconforming use. And again, case law sightings.
And I guess that goes toward part of the presentation that you heard from Protect Forest Lakes.
Yes, sir. All right, so on to number 16, PFL's appeal, finding a fact that would support zoning staff's decision and not support Lakemore's request for additional boats based on total square footage of pre-existing boats at Max Landing. All right, the Board of Appeal finds that the zoning administrator properly considered the existing evidence pertaining to boats and the usage of boats on the Lakemore property based upon the chain of title including the decades of use by the previous resort, which occupied the property known as Max Landing. Based on Exhibits 5 and 8, also see Exhibit 9 and Sub-Exhibit 6 to Exhibit 14, PFLs filed by PFL's legal counsel showing Lakemore's turning over of some boats and replacing them with other boats. All right, how do we feel about number 16, board? So I think we need to discuss abandonment and the chain of uses from owner to owner, potentially. Happy to listen to your ideas as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the two things that I'm, sort of having an issue that I think are probably causing everybody a lot of issues, some of the broad definitions of a boat, and then probably some vagueness to the word usage as well. I think, we're talking about usage for boats, usage for kayaks, pontoons, fishing, paddle boards, all of this. So if we're talking specifically about the finding of fact number 16 that you just read, I struggle with the usage piece of it.
I agree with you.
All right, so we're disagreeing with the administrator logic at this point? Is that your position?
I don't want to say I'm disagreeing with, I'm just struggling on the
Well,
usage and the intensity.
the outcome, in your opinion, would be different than current,
Yeah, I would say so for myself.
right?
Yeah, and again, feel free to add your own or cross things out as you deem are appropriate for findings.
This is such a difficult appeal. I agree with Preston, our zoning administrator, quite frankly. I think he did the best he could.
Paul, any discussion or opinion?
I'm tripping over the fact of usage. And I think that, I don't know if we need to lock in 16, where 17 may be better.
Okay.
I mean, if we want to go by usage, we'd strictly, I grant you, they were fishing boats, which is the generic term. But because of their horsepower, they were limited in what they could do compared to what's there right now. So that's where I'm having some issues with the usage issue, because I can't divorce in my mind the boat and its conveyance ability, its power. That to me, they're one and the same as far as determining usage.
Okay. All right, so let's go on to number 17 and work our way through the findings and discuss the results shortly. Number 17, PFL's appeal, finding a fact that would not support PFL's appeal and does support the zoning staff's administrative decision. And it says, the Board of Appeals finds that based upon the language contained in the zoning ordinance, lawful, nonconforming uses only have to be shown to have existed prior to 1976, and that the evidence shows that the Lakemore property, formerly known as Max Landing, used and rented boats for guests. The Board of Appeals further finds that although there is evidence on Exhibit 6 of appellant's October 29, 2021 letter of a turnover involving the sale of most of the older aluminum boats, this evidence shows a lack of intent on the part of Lakemore to abandon the lawful nonconforming use. As such, the board finds that the lawful nonconforming use has been established in the manner determined by planning and zoning staff. And then it references Exhibits 1, 5, 8, 9, 14, and appellant's sub-exhibit number 6.
I just have one additional comment there. After the 1976, it should say, or any later amendment, because obviously the ordinance got amended, the votes may be allowed after that. 2001 is really when they got restricted, but that's how it's read. And of course, you have additional exhibits that were presented in testimonies tonight.
Thank you. Discussion? Okay, so you support this? Okay. And who else?
I'm for it.
Okay,
I indicated earlier that was support.
that's a yes on your part? Yes, sir?
Just to clarify one piece that I'm hung up on, it says this evidence shows a lack of intent on the part of Lakemore to abandon the lawful nonconforming use, it talks about as they sold the aluminum boats.
Yeah, they sold and replaced it, okay? So there was a mixture of sales and replacement that occurred, over a period of time. Thanks for the clarification, that's what was occurring.
Okay. Okay.
There's evidence of the turnover and repurchase.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think I can get behind this one.
All right, thank you. Number 18 is a finding which would support PFL's appeal and reverse zoning staff's decision, and it says, "The Board of Appeals finds that upon Lakemore's purchase of Max Landing, Lakemore largely eliminated the fishing boats and the rental thereof on the property. This action shows a voluntary relinquishment of a lawful nonconforming use, and that Lakemore created a new unlawful use, to wit, large pontoon boats used for rental with high-powered engines, inclusive of the option to hire a captain to navigate these boats. The Board of Appeals further finds that the new pontoons constitute a new unlawful use that is of high intensity." I think it should read of a higher intensity than any of the previous fishing boat uses on Max Landing, referencing Exhibits 1, Section 2.1.
Again, you see presentation and materials
agree with that one.
You agree?
I brought it up when I was concerned about the intensity, so I agree with number 18.
Thank you.
Keep in mind that 18 would mean elimination of the local non-conforming.
Okay.
Could you say that again?
Yeah, this finding would support that the lawful non-conforming use, that to the extent there was one, was abandoned, and both through the elimination of votes as well as the very change in nature of the votes from like pontoon.
You say this would support the lawful non-conforming use be abandoned? Okay, okay.
If we,
Because it's a more intensive nonconformance.
Once it goes more intense, there's no going back to the existing lawful
That's the
non-conforming use?
position presented by, let's say, Forest Lakes, as well as the additional material received where they stated that the issue of the registration, combined with the 4 years, and that would be added to it. But the bottom line, this is a finding that abuse would eliminate the, would state that there is no longer a lawful non-conforming use when Lakemore took over. So I just wanted to make sure that we're clear on that, because you approved previous ones that would indicate that there was. And so that's why I say some of these will have to go by the wayside and others will have to stay.
how can we prove 17 and 18, right?
That's what I'm wondering.
Contradictory. You
Yes,
can't-
that's the
impossible.
idea.
Yeah, that's what I mean, I just want to put it
That's
in
why I wanted
similar
to point that
terms
out.
instead of,
Okay.
yeah, just.
Yeah, because you have choices here, and they're starkly
You
different.
can't really agree
Yeah.
with, yeah.
So you support? Gentlemen?
Well, I agree with 17, so I'm not going to agree with 18.
Okay.
I can't do 18. I mean, to me, they didn't abandon, so therefore, I'm still with 17.
Okay.
I'm torn here. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would have trouble supporting 18 and supporting 17, so I would say no to this one.
Okay.
Well, one question, though, is that just theoretically, is there any way of splitting this, that you can take 17, but then add?
I think I know where you're going.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of splitting it, but it's a matter of saying, look, we either decide that the lawful non-conforming use, to the extent there was one that existed under Max Landing, was abandoned because of the, the registration and this other evidence presented by Protect Forest Lakes. Two, we're going to go with the square footage and not care what type of boat it is, okay, whether it's a pontoon, a fishing boat, a boat's a boat, given our definition under the zoning ordinance, and there's evidence, to support that, and then differentiate between the square footage of what Lakemore had suggested, and then there's a couple of different other affidavits there. Or three, saying we're going to go with the square footage, or just go with the number of boats, but the boats are of the same type that Max Landing had, and therefore they have to remain as, anything from a fishing boat or a lesser, type of boat, whether it's a fishing boat with a 9-horse or kayaks or canoes or things of that nature. That seems to be what you're whittling it down to. But if you have something else, by all means, let me know and go ahead and express it. But that looks like where you're heading. Is that?
Yeah, that was pretty much
Okay.
the fact that if you're talking about an allowance of a nonconformity, you have to be within everything, and therefore, we'd be expanding it to go to the 130 horsepower.
That's part of what you're
Yeah.
looking at. Yeah. Again, there's no real case law on it, there's peripheral law that we talked about. So I'm not saying you're right, okay? I'm not saying you're wrong. It's a little bit of new law that may, crop up here. You just have to do your best based upon the facts and evidence and the ordinance you have before you.
So then I'm suggesting that we keep 17, but add the piece in there about the create a new unlawful use, to wit, large pontoon boats used for rental with high-power engines. Just from that spot, move it up, incorporate it.
Or you could do a separate thing saying that the type of boat has to be the same intensity and scope, and that intensity and scope is the fishing boat or something less than that.
I like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. That's where my own mind is going.
Okay.
Like I said, there's no direct case law on that. You have a definition of boats that includes pretty much everything.
Mhm.
So, you have to do the best you can.
Well, that's my position then.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's the definition of boats, but then there's also an increase in intensity, so I feel like they're trying to weigh each other like scales here.
It's a valid point.
Difficult.
Right. All right, let's go on to 19. These are findings of fact on Lakemore's appeal of the square footage and number of boats. Number 19, finding which would support staff determination of nature and scope of the lawful nonconforming use, which says the Board of Appeals finds that the zoning administrator's decision, supported by the planner in her memo to the Planning Commission, properly looked at the nature of the number of boats as a mass, and given the additional size of the pontoons, properly determined the number of boats in pontoon form that constituted a lawful nonconforming use by comparing the historical number of boats at Max Landing with the number of pontoons. The number of pontoons approved by the zoning administrator as a lawful nonconforming use matches the requirement that the continuation of the lawful nonconforming use be substantially of the same size and the same essential nature as a use existing at the time of passage of a valid zoning ordinance or an amendment thereto. And case law additionally is cited.
And that's once, given your previous discussion, where you could change the issue, whether it's pontoons or whether that's the slight change, it should be, slight change would be major, obviously, to Lakemore, that it relates to the smaller type of boats. So that's how you could rework that finding, if that's where you're going, or you can keep it the same and decide that the pontoons are it. I mean, the decision of Preston was that here's the square footage of the boats. We don't really care what it is, but we know that, Lakemore wanted pontoons, and this results, in the square footage of about 3 pontoons and no other boats, okay? So that's part of the nuance of what you're looking at.
Discussion?
I'm fine with the 3 pontoons, and I doesn't think anyone's agreeing with me, but 3 pontoons are fine.
We sincerely appreciate your position, whatever it is, always.
Yeah.
The 3 pontoons could become potentially 8 pontoons or however, well, I guess it would have to fit it within that square footage, correct? And it will only allow for 3. Okay.
But if we're defining a boat is a boat is a boat, back to the kayak discussion, I know that doesn't sound like anybody really has an issue with the kayaks, but, technically, it would be only pontoons and nothing else.
That's right, you have to be pontoon. Your mass of square footage is what it is of any type of boat. That's what Preston determined, based upon the existence of the boats known at the time.
Right.
Yes.
Keep that in mind whether you shift into something other than the pontoons and go back to the fishing boat, scope and intensity or that, but that would be the limit, just so you know that, if it was the pontoons.
Okay.
Yeah, we allow those 3 pontoons, we're not allowing fishing boats.
Yeah, that's both
Exactly.
boats,
That's-
okay,
that's
that's
right.
what Mr. Taylor or Preston's decision was, here's, we're looking at it as a mass, we're not gonna, you didn't make a decision, which
Yeah.
is part of what you're grappling
Exactly.
with, on whether what kind of boat it is.
Yep.
You're saying that if, given that mass, if you're gonna have these type of pontoons of this size, it's gonna be 3 and nothing else.
All right. How do you feel? You're good, yeah.
Does it have to say in pontoon form, since we're talking about all boats? Properly determine the number of boats in pontoon form if we're talking about square footage?
You can eliminate this, say, well, any type of square footage. The reason that, it was that Lake Moore asked about the pontoons, and that's why, it was done based upon what they actually desired. You can eliminate it and just say, I don't care what the boat is. Here's your square footage.
I would agree with that, with the elimination of pontoon.
Get rid of pontoons and we'll just go with the square footage of any type of boat.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
That is.
So you're putting what, a period after, as a mass, period?
So how do you feel about fourth line, pontoons, comma, properly determine the number of boats by area?
I like that.
Yeah.
Better than just saying that it's a pontoon.
Yeah, you can change that.
I can support
Yeah, I think that's.
how Preston
That's great.
and staff.
Are we okay with that?
That.
Could you
Matt?
read that
Yeah, I
then?
would support
Okay.
that.
Great.
Could you read that as the Board of Appeals finds the zoning administrator's decision supported the planner in a memo,
Make sure that Leslie's writing this.
but the memo dealt with pontoons, correct?
Yeah, I think we're deciding what we support
Yeah.
and what we don't.
Yeah, okay.
He dealt with it only mainly because that's what the applicant was asking about, and that's what they preferred, so it's not.
The intent of the memo was not specifically to just pontoons.
Okay.
Yeah, he did say, I'm just rereading the memo, it says both motorized and non-motorized boats count towards the total boat storage
Okay.
permitted on site, and he references 630 square feet.
All right, and, before we
So it was
finish,
his memo, not her memo.
Preston's memo.
Okay, I'm just saying it says her memo, and I was thinking it was Claire's.
I think Claire probably assisted in that, but
Okay.
Oh, good point.
Preston has to make the tough choice because he can see it.
so again, to continue with the tally on 19, how many yeses do we have?
With the changes from pontoon to boat, I support that.
Okay,
Yeah, I do too, same with the
Okay.
changes.
Paul, Matt? Yes, ma'am.
Can you reiterate your changes?
Yes. So jump in here, board, if you have a better idea. But the Board of Appeals finds that the zoning administrator's decision, supported by the planner in her memo to the Planning Commission, properly looked at the nature of the number of boats as a mass and by area, substantially of the same size, same essential nature as a use existing at the time of the passage, etc. Do you want anything more?
No, it's fine.
All right.
I like the memo too, because it does spell it out.
Just one thing, further dissect it.
Yes, sir.
Line 5 says, we've still got a lawful non-conforming use, well, I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Talks about the number of boats, I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4. Line 4, properly determine the number of boats.
Yeah, by area.
So, okay, so we added by area, number of boats by area.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we added it twice. There's nature of the number of boats by area as a mass, and properly determine the number of boats by area. So you added that twice?
I didn't specifically call that out. We can amend it per your suggestion.
Okay. That's, all right,
What
that would
do
be
you-
it, yeah.
You want it in there twice?
Well, it goes on to say, the nature of the number of boats, and we said we were going to add by area, right? And then,
As a mass, and properly determine the number of boats by area.
by area.
And properly,
That constitute a lawful non-conforming use by comparing the historical number of boats at max landing period? Is that what you were looking at? You didn't want the rest of it?
No, we can have the rest of it. I was just concerned that the memo that we're referencing here doesn't specifically say how many boats are allowed. It just says 630 square feet, which is approximately 3 pontoons. It never really determines a quantity of boats.
That's true, because it could be other smaller boats.
Right.
All right.
That was it.
So, everybody support? Or is there further discussion?
I'm good with that.
okay.
Good? Okay. So, we're going to recess until 9:05, starting right now.
So, we're knocking out.
I didn't realize it was that late. Only got like 15 more to go.
So that's, yes, we're knocking out.
I don't know how many. 20, 21, 23, to get through a few more. 3 more pages.
Well, it came down here, period, right? And then the board finds that Lake Moore created a new unlawful use, to wit, large pontoon boats used for the rental of high-powered engines, inclusive of the option of a captain, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if these are mutually exclusive. If we're going with, I don't know if we adopted 16, but I know 17 we did. It looks like we're taking a piece of 18 putting it with 17. And then you come over and you say, okay, fine, this is the findings for PLF, and we have the findings for Lakewood.
I know, it's confusing.
all we can do is look back at the last one and appreciate that one kind of fast. Yeah, Oh, you know. You and I are okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd please take your seats, we'd like to continue our process and get out of here at a reasonable time tonight, if possible. All right, so we've made it through findings of fact number 19, and we're done with discussion on that point. On to number 20. This finding, which would support appellant Lakemore's appeal and reverse township zoning staff's determination of the scope of the lawful nonconforming use at Lakemore. And it says, "The Board of Appeals finds that the lawful nonconforming use on the Lakemore site with respect to the predecessor and title Max Landing use, to wit, the number of boats provided to guests for rent included at a minimum of at least 14 evidence of other numbers, obviously, 14-foot aluminum boats, as well as other unmotorized watercraft such as canoes. As such, the Board of Appeals finds that the lawful nonconforming use is not related to the size or horsepower of the boats, but rather directly linked to the number of boats that existed at Max Landing prior to the regulations contained in the zoning ordinance as they existed before 1976. As such, the Board of Appeals finds that a lawful nonconforming use pertains to the number of watercraft equating to the 14-foot aluminum boat. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what it says. Let's amend that. As such, the Board of Appeals finds that a lawful nonconforming use pertains to the number of watercraft equaling 14 aluminum boats that are motorized, as well as the number of unmotorized boats as established and proven by Lakemore, which has the burden of proof with respect to the lawful nonconforming use. The Board of Appeals further finds that the horsepower of any given boat's engine or lack of an engine is not relevant, is not a relevant factor with respect to the continuation of the lawful nonconforming use. Cases are cited, as are Exhibits 1, 4, 5, 8, 9, and 13. All right, Board, how do you feel?
I can't support that one.
Yeah, I think the way we wrote 19, how can we support 20?
Okay,
I agree.
Yep. No.
all right, we all agree. Thank you. On to 21. Findings of fact on Lakemore's request that the definition of boat in the zoning ordinance does not include non-motorized watercraft such as kayaks, canoes, or paddle boats. Number 21, finding of fact which would determine that all watercraft are included in the zoning ordinance definition of boat. The Board of Appeals finds that the definition of boat in the zoning ordinance is unambiguous in that it reads as follows. Boat means every description of watercraft used or capable of being used as a means of transportation on water. The Board of Appeals finds that the definition is broad and is being used in this case only to the extent that Section 405.2.1 prohibits boat access sites for multiple boats in the LA district, exception for public boat launch sites under public ownership. See Exhibit 1. Discussion?
It's fine with me.
I don't have an issue with it.
Okay. So we have 2 yeses, is that correct? Okay. Okay.
So going back to the top, this is starting the finding of facts on Lakemore's request that the definition of a boat in the zoning ordinance does not include non-motorized watercraft.
Yes, Lakemore wanted, in addition to the motorized watercraft, the ability, which they already mentioned and talked about on the site here, to have the kayaks and the other non-motorized watercraft. The zoning administrator's decision was, here's when the boat's a boat, here's the square footage of what was there. It doesn't matter what kind of watercraft it is because all watercraft are included in the definition of boat. That's what this finding basically says.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I support that.
All right, thank you. Number 22 says finding of fact supporting the zoning administrator's decision that limiting the total square footage of docks allowed to extend over the waters of Arbutus Lake not to exceed 400 square feet.
That's a mistake, it's 630 is the zoning administrator, just so you know. Oh, on the docks, never mind.
Yeah, dock.
I'm mixing, I need more to bring, I guess.
All right, we're good, no problem. All right, so we'll start again. Finding of fact supporting the zoning administrator's decision that limiting the total square footage of docks allowed to extend over the waters of Arbutus Lake not to exceed 400 square feet based on his original opinion of July 19, 2021. The Board of Appeals finds and reaffirms its general findings of fact, laying out the definitions in the zoning ordinance of boat access and boat access site for multiple boats, which include mooring and docking systems. The board further finds that Section 405 of the zoning ordinance governing uses in the Lakes Area District, 2.1 specifically states that boat access sites for multiple boats as defined in this zoning ordinance shall not be permitted. The board finds that the cabin court use is providing access for multiple boats that is otherwise prohibited under the ordinance and therefore can only remain as a lawful nonconforming use. The board further finds that there is no evidence establishing a lawful nonconforming use of boat dockage beyond 400 square feet, and therefore the zoning administrator's determination in this letter dated July 19, 2021, limiting the total square footage of dock systems to no more than 400 square feet is supported by the evidence as presented by Lakemore, who has the burden of proof of showing the existence of a lawful nonconforming use. Exhibits 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 9, and 14 are cited.
Before you go, the reason I included this, even though I don't agree with it, is because that's part of the position of say, Lakes is the issue of the size of the boat docks. The reason I flagged that after Preston's decision to issue a supplemental on August 31st of last year is 23 is more in line with what I believe the ordinance actually states. You can still use 22, or, maybe you can obviously make that decision and agree that the dockage themselves are also regulated and therefore are stuck with the 400 square feet. You're welcome to make that decision, and this would be a finding that would at least be best to support that. In my opinion, I think that'd be very hard for me to defend that part of the decision. I'm just letting it go.
Okay, could you give us just a little bit more color on to what extent our zoning ordinance allows
Even as the dock size?
yeah, dock size, number of docks?
I mean, maybe Preston can do a better job because he, somebody local who knows the lakes and has seen some of the docking systems out there. But I would bet, from just my experience as a boater on Torch Lake, you see all sorts of different sized docks and docking systems. Now, there's multiple townships along Torch, because it's a big lake, that have different regulations pertaining to docks, but most of those regulations on my other clients that regulate docks have to do with the number of docks. I've yet to see one that talks about the square footage of the docks, whether you have a dock that has a patio or anything of that nature. And I don't see any regulation as to the square footage of docks contained in the zoning ordinance, either in the definitions or by regulation, much less the number of docks as well. If someone can point that out, maybe I missed something, that there's some sort of regulation that says all docks must be, a certain square footage. I know that Ms. McGregor pointed out that, the same general scope of what's in the area. Well, I bet you the same general scope is going to be a variety of different dock sizes, even on Arbutus Lake, much less the other lakes in the area. That's normal. It's just how people make their decisions. So I prefer something more precise. I don't want you to guess, okay? Either you regulate it, all right, and it states that here's the amendment, says the dock has to be one dock per lot, or the dock has to be 100 square feet, or cannot go out more than 50 feet, or something of that type of zoning regulation. If you don't have it, it's not regulated.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Mr. regulate docks or anything like that, in your knowledge?
On inland lakes, generally not. On certain inland lakes, like Lake Charlevoix, which is subject to Army Corps of Engineer jurisdiction, I did have a case with a client, South Arm Township, where we did have to, bring in the Army Corps on top of the zoning ordinance, which didn't regulate very well, that it was a hazard in the South Arm navigation to the old East Jordan Ironworks that are by the South Arm. I don't know if you're familiar with Lake Charlevoix. Has a South Arm that goes into a passage there. There was actually still freighter traffic at that time. And because it connects directly to Lake Michigan, there's a few other lakes in Michigan like that, then the Army Corps can make a decision on docks, and that includes docks out on Grand Traverse Bay.
Thank you.
And Mr. Taylor, are you aware of anything further?
No, there was a collective discussion between Mr. Wendling, Ms. Carner and I, and we looked extensively in our ordinance and could not find any specific size dimensions that the ordinance regulates.
Okay. Where do you want to go?
That's a tricky one, because I think the first 15 minutes of the meeting, I wrote down with a star, docks not regulated by East Bay Township, so. How you gonna? Yeah, that's what I mean, I'm just simplifying again, but how are you gonna prove that in the court of law when docks aren't regulated? I know our views like, some long docks too, because I'm out there almost every day fishing. In the summer, and in lake number 2.
All right, further discussion? How do you feel, board? Support or not?
Support that.
What?
I support.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, there was no language that regulated docks within the ordinance, correct? Is that what you stated?
That's correct.
Then I can't support
Yeah,
that if
I'm-
there's no language.
I'm no too.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree that I wouldn't support that.
Okay, thank you. Number 23, finding which would support Lakemore's determination not to limit the square footage of the docking system. And it says, "The Board of Appeals finds and reaffirms its general findings of fact, laying out the definitions in a zoning ordinance of boat access and boat access site for multiple boats, which include mooring and docking systems. The Board of Appeals finds that on August 31st, 2021, zoning administrator Preston Taylor reviewed the ordinance regulations and determined that the zoning ordinance does not regulate the size and square footage of docks and docking systems under the East Bay Charter Township zoning ordinance. The board further finds that while Section 405 of the zoning ordinance, which regulates uses in the lakes area, prohibits boat access sites for multiple boats as defined under the zoning ordinance, there... What's that?
The "and" is, I think, doesn't work.
I think you're right. Okay. Reset here. The board further finds that while Section 405 of the zoning ordinance, which regulates uses in the Lakes Area District, prohibits boat access sites for multiple boats as defined under the zoning ordinance, there is nothing under the zoning ordinance which limits the size of docks to begin with. As such, the board finds that the evidence shows that Max Landing had up to 8 temporary dock systems, but that the ordinance did not and currently does not regulate the square footage and size of such dock systems. Therefore, the board finds that Lake Moore is only limited as a lawful nonconforming use to 8 temporary dock systems, but not as to the square footage of such dock systems, as they are not regulated under the zoning ordinance. See Exhibits 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 12, and 13.
I put a note underneath there that even that, there may not be a limitation to the 8, but that's what was there.
All right, discussion?
You said there could be more than 8, Mr. Wendling?
Well, I believe that's, and I guess you can ask Lakemore, at one point there were 8 there. I don't see it right. You could put that in the zoning ordinance and maybe, and then you're stuck with also, lawful non-conforming uses all over the lake and how many docks, because it's not uncommon to have a regulation saying, 1 dock for 100 feet of foot frontage on a lake. I've seen that in many ordinances, and that's been upheld, in cases in the past. I just don't see that language in the zoning ordinance, but you have to address what's in the zoning ordinance. But I don't know if we really need to get into the number here, and I crossed, and this is up to you, but I crossed out the last sentence, read that the board finds that Lakemore is not limited as to the square footage of such dock systems as they're not regulated under the zoning ordinance, and leave it at that, not even get into the numbers. I don't believe it's necessary.
I would support that with that correction.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree too.
And could you please convey your amendment to Leslie?
We're going to be looking at, I'm going to look at what Leslie does, and she'll look at what I do, and we'll make sure that the instruction and everything to the final version is the record.
Thank you.
Before you review it your next meeting.
Can I ask, I'm just curious, how many docks are there now? 4, okay.
How long are they?
Matt?
I think I support as
Right.
it's been
Thank you.
amended.
Yeah, I support it. By the way, on 22, I misread that. I don't support that.
Ah, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Got it. Thank you. All right. So we are through our findings of fact. And Mr. Wendling, would you like to give us some guidance at this point, please?
Well, it appears that your decision, based upon your discussions, would be that, based upon the findings of fact as amended tonight, both general and specific, that it appears that you are going to rule that you're going to uphold the zoning administrator's restriction of boats to a total of 630 square feet. However, you're going to eliminate the fact that it doesn't matter what kind of boat it is. It's all boats together of any type being 630 square feet. And that the township doesn't regulate the docks, and that the docks are not regulated in a manner either directly or indirectly, and therefore don't constitute a lawful non-conforming use that are allowed.
Okay.
Something of that nature. And that impacts, both sides of the
Certainly.
But also the issue on the horsepower.
Well, you touched on that issue, but apparently, from what I heard from other members, and you can certainly discuss it more here. I heard board members gravitate away from the horsepower and simply stay with the square footage. But go ahead and feel free to discuss that if you want.
By all means, how do you feel?
No, I'm just threw that out there. I don't know if the board says no, the board says no.
I'm still torn on the increase of intensity of pontoon boats, but I have to go with what the definition of the zoning ordinance classifies a boat. That's the language that's in front of us, so I can't deviate from that.
Okay.
I would just add that, as this conversation started, we were talking about, Google images, satellite images, old pictures out of historical documents of how many boats, what kind of boats. And the document that we've got, I was interested to see was the registration of the boats. This seems like a little more concrete, quantitative documentation than some of the other methods. But again, this is, this gets, it further kind of muddles the whole conversation related to abandonment and some other issues. So I think the issue at hand to discuss tonight is Preston's determination in his letter, and that's what we're discussing tonight. This was being appealed.
That's what's being appealed.
Right.
Okay.
So I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but is it sufficient to say that we simply affirm the zoning administrator's decision?
Yeah, just put in the detail that of both his letters from July as amended in this letter pertaining to the docket of August 31st of 2021, and that you're affirming his decision not based upon pontoons, but his total mass of boats allowed on the property of 630 square feet, if that's what you wish to do.
Okay. So further discussion, board?
No.
But that includes the no dock regulated.
Yeah,
The
the
boats,
docks are
period.
not regulated.
Okay, yep. No, I'm fine.
We can only go with what's in there.
Okay. If nothing further, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Windley, this is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I know it's good.
You can cite that.
Lindsay, you're good at that stuff. You say it more elegantly.
No, I would just say exactly what Mr.
That's what I was
Whitman
gonna say,
stated,
too.
and I would support
Yeah, and I'll second on her.
his nice
Her motion.
conclusion wrap-up
Is
of,
it your preference? What I generally said is that the direction that the board wishes to go.
Yes.
Did you vote on
In
that?
which case, does the board wish me to write a motion to that effect?
that, I don't think
Yeah.
that would hurt.
Just take a moment to do that.
I'm impressed we made it through. I'm impressed we made it through the whole packet.
Or said, is this final? Then
He's drafting a proposed motion, and we can act on it as we wish.
Bless you.
just be a motion by, whoever does it, supported by whoever does it, that the East Bay Township Zoning Board of Appeals supports the zoning administrator's decision that the total amount by mass of established lawful nonconforming boats constitutes a total of 630 square feet based upon the evidence presented and adopting the findings of fact, both general and specific. The board further finds that the zoning ordinance does not regulate dock size length or number.
Hey, I do need to ask one favor and strike mass and change it to area.
Okay, then the same motion with instead of mass would be area.
Thank you.
Is that your motion, Lindsay?
That's my motion.
Okay, I'll
Thanks,
support it.
Peter.
Yeah, thanks.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, everybody.
As far as the appellate period here, there's not going to be a decision rendered tonight handed out directly to any party here. So therefore, the appellate period will begin under the statute based upon the approval of the ZBA's minutes at the next regular board.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to reports. Town board report, please.
We had our last meeting on February 15th. There wasn't really any...
Please let us continue our meeting.
There wasn't a whole lot of issues to discuss. There was some discussion on lateral fees associated with the 4-mile roundabout. It got tabled until we have some additional information. We had a discussion about Town Line Road. There's some issues with obviously the condition of Town Line and some concerns about it. More specifically, the south end of it, adjacent to the new development. So some discussions on how that was to be paid for. The developer had agreed, I think as part of their site plan approval, to make some improvements there. We spent some time talking about the ARPA funding. It was just general discussion, nothing very specific, but there was discussions on how we move forward and where to spend money. It looks like that was about it of any importance.
Okay, thank you very much. Planning Commission.
Yes, sir. At the Planning Commission, we passed or at least passed on to public hearing for the amendment for multiple use expansion thereof. And then we also approved the Stella Hospitality project, which is on 31, which is the 2 hotels and then a retail establishment. And then all of the items were tabled to the next meeting, so.
Thank you.
Okay.
And at this time, we would entertain public comments of any nature. If you have anything you'd like to address the board regarding, please step up to the mic and let us know.
I just have a question as a person who lives on Arbutus Lake. What you decided today, you said goes into effect in 1 month?
After the next board meeting, the time, the clock starts for that judicial filing, if there's an appeal, that's how I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, as an appeal, but because you found here there should be changes on the lake this summer, that this summer they're required to go to the 630 square feet?
Unless there's some type of successful appeal that happens between now and the summer, then that is correct.
So it doesn't go on hold until the appeals are done? Like this isn't going to go on for 3 more years while they're appealing, and they can keep running boats?
I believe a judge would actually have to order that, they don't have to comply after our next meeting and the approval of the minutes.
That's my understanding.
Okay, And one more silly question, just because I'm new to all this kind of thing. I mean, I appreciate what you guys do. This is amazing. But who enforces this?
That gentleman.
Okay. I just was kind of curious on how everything goes forward and what we expect to see as lake residents.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Would anybody else like to speak?
Good evening, Caitlin Flensky, 660 East Arbutus Lake Road. Am I correct to presume that the 630 square feet includes all boats, kayaks, paddleboards, and renters bringing their own boats? Can you please confirm that?
The only thing that I'm not clear on, and hopefully you or Mr. Wendling can help us, is whether it's a boat brought by a guest. I am confident, based on what we've determined this evening, that a boat is any kind of boat, and it is limited to 630 square feet of.
And the multi-boat access site is limited to 630 square feet. So if a renter is storing, you're saying
I
no.
can't speak to that.
That's the non-conforming use that we are appealing.
Okay, but I can't speak to if a renter moors his boat 100 feet from the shore.
That's
whether
illegal on
that's-
an inland lake.
Whether that's part of the 630 square foot limit or not.
Yeah, a non-riparian cannot moor their boat on an inland lake because we own the bottomlands to the middle of the lake. So that is technically trespassing.
Okay, and I have no basis to dispute that. I just don't know enough to affirm your question.
So if we could get confirmation on that, that would be great from Mr. Wendling.
I believe that the square footage is not including public access that would come over to it. I would need to get clarification on that tomorrow from Mr. Wendling.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Anything further? Yes, ma'am.
Carol Husel, resident of East Bay Township and property owner. Arbutus Lake isn't the only lake in East Bay Township that has cabin courts. As I've presented at previous Planning Commission meetings, Spider Lake has at least a half a dozen cabin courts. And I believe, just as Mr. Wendling said, that the decisions you made tonight perhaps may go further than here. How about we just look at it from the aspect of our own little township here and our forest lakes? And I am concerned about how it's going to set a precedent, the decisions made tonight. Some may help protect our lakes and some may not. But again, remember, it's not just the Lake Moore situation. I also ask that if it's within your rights as, or your job responsibilities, that you send a message to the Planning Commission that the ordinances of East Bay Township in regards to many of these issues, including the dock issues, need to be addressed. There appears to be many things missing. As a member of the Spider Lake Property Owners Association and the Water Quality Committee, we paid for a subscription to the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association quarterly magazine called the Michigan Riparian, and had that sent to the Township's Planning and Zoning Department in hopes that it would be shared with you folks as well as the Planning Commission. And in just the recent edition of it, there was a whole article written by a lawyer who specializes in lake issues, and he had a multiple number of suggestions as to ordinances that townships with lakes will need to likely address in the near future. Docks was among them, and there were many others. I hope that that article would be shared with you folks and take that into consideration as you move along. Thank you for the work you do. It's obviously very.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Nancy McCulloch, 2812 Bass Bay Court on Arbutus Lake. I just want to say a couple quick things. I think I'm correct in saying, had the resort stuck to 9 fishing boats, or whatever you want to call them, with 9 horsepower motors, we would not be here tonight. So that kind of speaks very loudly in my common sense that says something isn't adding up then. Is it really the same, square footage and use? But that's not what we're talking about. Your decision, the square footage, that is just upholding what was decided last July, and July through October boating season, it was not enforced. The problem is you're passing something that's not enforceable. How do you determine, I mean, go with a measuring tape? Well, this is just here for the day, and that one's not, doesn't belong there, and, well, a kayak's not a boat, and, you know, I mean, we heard today there are 30 other boats there, plus the fishing boats, plus, I think it was said 4 pontoons. And that's under what you just affirmed tonight. It has to be enforceable. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, thanks, everyone. Our meeting is now adjourned.
Just so everybody knows that.